Welcome to the Nightbird Radio Podcast. I'm Timothy Saylor, and I'm going to be your host this evening as we sound out the subconscious, navigate the nocturnal, and explore the farthest reaches of our experience. Coming at you from a 1986 Dodge Ram van on the rolling foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains in the Great Forest, deep in the heart of the Kali Yuga. This is radio for the hauntological turn. And welcome back, Nightbirds. I've got a great episode for you tonight. I talked with artist and illustrator Kurt Huggins, and we covered a wide range of topics. I'm really proud to present this conversation. It didn't even feel like 3 hours. We talked about H.R. Giger, H.P. Lovecraft, recovery, the archons, angels, magic, just everything that you could hope for in a conversation here on the Nightbird Radio Podcast. It really captures the essence of everything I wanted to cover when I started this. And so, like I said, I'm very proud to present it, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. So without further ado, here's the conversation. It's great to have you on, Kurt. I'm really excited about this conversation.
I'm actually, yeah, me too. I'm actually curious what spurred you to ask me?
Because I like, we're on some communities together online, and I like where you come at some of this stuff from. I just like your opinions that you've had, and I just figured you had some cool stories.
Awesome. Okay.
And I love your art. Your art is really cool. I'm really excited to maybe talk about that a little bit.
Talk about no, that's sorry. I'm just kidding.
That's off limits.
Off limits. No, I mean, I was actually thinking about it. It's like I don't know if there's a way to. I don't know if there's a separation between the two subjects.
I don't think so either.
Yeah, I think they're kind of. It's all one and the same.
Yeah, between magic and art.
Magic and art. Yeah, I don't think there's really. It's funny because. Like Alan Moore, who's a big hero of mine, and probably maybe one of the main reasons I'm like pursued any of this stuff. I mean, he's basically like all like the early shamans or witch doctors. It was all one thing: theater, visual art, music, and like spirituality, journey. Like all of it was one thing that's just over time slowly got pieced out and turned into like different things, like narrative too, all of it. So it's, yeah, I don't think there's, well, at least in my experience with doing anything creative, I don't know that there's a way that for it not to be magical, because it's really sort of, you're swimming in the same waters. You're maybe getting slightly different. Well, not even that. I don't even know if like the outcomes are that different.
Right.
You know.
Yeah. You are bringing something into the world through this channel, whatever you want to call it. I mean, you're conjuring.
Yeah. And now is like the filmmaking stuff, is that like recent for you, or is it something you pursued for a while?
No, that was recent for me. That was actually kind of outside of my experience. So it was a cool opportunity to learn some of that, and it didn't really go anywhere, but that's okay. You know what I mean? It kind of led me to do this because this is really what I wanted to do, what I've been wanting to do for a long time.
Oh, so like well, it's funny because that's in my journey. It's kind of like, and this is a big component of doing creativity is failure,
right?
And like, and honestly, like there's and this was something that it took me a long time to kind of come to, because I think there's this real thing about, especially when you're young, about the idea of the genius, and that you're going to be like amazing right out of the gate. And that's just not true for 99% of people. And the fact is that even the people that you see as being very successful are like really potent, powerful creatives. Often all the failures are hidden, or they've just disappeared and faded. So you don't see them, but they're all there. And I've like read a lot, like writers, for instance, they'll have 10 books they never finished before they got to their one that was published or whatever. So it's I just think that's really interesting that you did this film thing and you're like, I didn't work out, but now I'm doing what I want to do.
Well, and you know what? The thing that I enjoyed the most about it was like writing, which I already have done for a long time. And then what I wasn't expecting to like as much was the acting stuff. Which is, again, it's performative, right? It sort of makes sense because I don't know. There's just something very ritualistic about acting out a scene, especially one that I wrote. It was like a very potent high.
I can imagine. It's because it's I mean, to tie it back into like it's possession,
right? Yeah,
and it's
willing possession. Yeah,
it's you. And now there might be some differences as far as like, that's a funny question. Do you feel like you've ever actually experienced that?
Yeah.
Possession. Yes.
Now that I look back on it, yeah.
Was it in the acting or was it something else entirely?
It was at church.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes. Yeah. It was on a youth group trip that we would do, and we would do like the whole. And, the context is obviously like really weird because we would do the whole, like, I don't know if you're familiar with the evangelical forms of. Well, I mean, yeah, you spent time in Georgia,
Well, what's funny? What's funny is I'm mostly ignorant of most Christian stuff, even though I grew up in. Yeah.
So this was there's a performative aspect to this too, and it's where you kind of do this presentation where you like describe to someone why they need salvation. Like in this case would be like because you're a sinner, and you're the worst or whatever. Explain the vehicle of that salvation, and then there's like kind of almost an ecstatic thing at the end, when after people have come up and decided to, they're basically, when they're giving their lives to Christ or whatever you want to call it, when they're being saved, I think that is in a way a possession too. But the context of my experience of possession was during worship, singing, praying, and I would kind of like, it wasn't speaking in tongues because I was actually like, we called it prophesying. I was just like speaking. Channeling really is what I would call it nowadays, right? And yeah, just like words would just like pour out of me. And it was a really charged experience. And there's like people standing around like laying hands and stuff. It just, in a Methodist context too, so not really common for that denomination at all. But you get into these kind of like nooks and crannies of it where, like, I think I talked with Michael a little bit about this on that episode of like, it's weird how like you have like mainstream Christianity, but then you get into these little Bible studies and that's where like the real, like there's magic going on, like actual, but you have to kind of get into these little cracks. And it's not always like that. I wouldn't call like a great context, right? Because we were like, I don't know. I didn't feel good about making someone feel shitty about themselves just so that they could feel good about being saved. But it's almost like, oh, hey, you're going to go through a mystery religion initiation and not even know it. It's not like a cool thing to do to someone, especially at that age.
Oh, that's really interesting. Oh my God. Okay. So that I have about 30 different directions.
Awesome.
What you just said. Let's start from the most recent to go. One of which is, it's funny you're talking about like the weird magic is like in the nooks and crannies of Christianity, because it seems like um, the two big main through like rivers, I guess you could say, of Christianity, which is Catholic Catholicism and Orthodox Christianity. The Orthodox has, and I've been reading about this, have kept that mystic tradition alive. Like that's woven into their church more. Where it seems like I feel like the Catholic one is kind of like it's sort of to the side now. It's not as like, although it's still alive, and again the nooks and crannies, but it's not like as part. Whereas like the Greek Orthodox, it seems like, oh yeah, we totally. There's a book I was just reading. I forget the guy's name. A Greek author. He was writing. It's called The Mountain of Silence, I think, where there's this in Greece. There's this totally autonomous island that has been autonomous since I think the Byzantine Empire. And it is the whole entire island is a monastery, and all of the monks there, they pray like 4 hours a day, like 8 hours a day, I don't know, forever. And there's this like rich like kind of oral history of like all of their like crazy spiritual experiences. And it's like reading this book was like, wow, this is like still happening. Like basically they're still holding a tradition alive that was like all the way back to like Saint Francis of Assisi and stuff. Like people actually, getting charged with the Holy Spirit, as it were. Yeah, I don't know. That's really, it's really fascinating. And then it's alive here in like the swamps and the
right
woods and shit.
Yeah, and I should clarify, because when I say mainstream Christianity, I should be more specific, right? I'm talking about mainstream evangelical Christianity, which is where I had my experience with, which would be like the redheaded stepchild third dream of
the possible CIA influenced.
Yeah. Well, man, I was just reading about the wandering bishops, and because I'm reading Sinister Forces, and I'm reading that chapter about. Have you read it?
No, I've never read it.
Oh my gosh, he goes into this whole chapter about the wandering bishops and like how it's basically just like all these intelligence. I don't even know how something like this comes about, but it's basically it's heavily kind of infiltrated by intelligence people, and it's all these people kind of just collecting what do you call it? I don't know, being ordained as a bishop, but they collect being ordained from different people. So they just like, well, that one might not have been legit. So they just get like a bunch of people to just, I'm not even doing a good job explaining this. It's really fascinating though.
So basically they just keep getting, becoming official.
Yeah.
In different churches.
And it'll be like different, really like, like the Orthodox Catholic Church of America. It's like, it's totally like just almost like a CIA front. It's interesting. Yeah, that's a good book.
Well, there was another thing you were talking about with in relation to the possession, where like, you were saying how like it's almost these people are getting thrown into a mystery cult initiation and they don't even realize it. And that kind of ties into one of the things I kind of did on the lark was I did a novena to the Sacred Heart of Jesus, right? And I kind of modified it a bit because after the prayers, I would do this thing where I I basically worked in tech from like Reiki. There's this Reiki energetic thing where you imagine the Reiki symbol and you breathe it into different chakras. Like I think there's even a recording of it somewhere on Rune Soup that Lance has run people through. So I basically did that, but instead of a Reiki symbol, I was using the actual Sacred Heart.
Oh, that's really
And
cool.
and and then at the end, it was like you would imagine like the energy coming in, and then using it to bless people, like you'd imagine them, and you'd build like a. So I went through this, and then like I finished it up, and I sat down, and I was like, well, I guess that was interesting. That was kind of cool. And then I felt this thing, and I'm like, oh shit, I'm about to journey. Like it was, and then it was this crazy, like immediate, like snap into it. I'm in a trance state, my eyes close, and then this thing unfurls. And I think I'm trying to remember what the first one was. The first one was, I think, was actually me as Christ having sex with Mary Magdalene.
Hell yeah.
And then that unspurled, I forget exactly, I'd have to read all the notes, but like, so every day I did the novena, another one of these would happen. Like I would just, I'm like, what, am I going to get a journey? Or like, and then like, sometimes it was immediate, sometimes it was like a minute or two, and then it would just sort of unwind. And the thing I realized about that is that, you know how there's like, apparently, and I don't know how true this is, but apparently like insane asylums are filled with people who think they're Jesus. Right? I think those people actually are. They're connecting to this.
Yeah, because, I think so too. I think we just put those people in an insane asylum.
And then I think we put them in the insane asylum, and then they also don't have the context, because I have at least had some experience with journeying and psychedelics and other things to where when this happened, I wasn't like, oh, I'm Jesus now.
Right.
But I'm like, oh, this is a real thing that you can connect to. And I think a lot of that is that like people are connecting to this, because I don't think it's actually that hard to connect to. I think it's very present. And I think they're connecting to it, and then they have no context for it. So they think, oh, I'm Jesus. I'm him born again. And it's like, yes and no.
Right. It's realizing that you're Jesus without realizing that everyone else is also Jesus.
Yes, exactly.
Right. Like it's kind of centered inward instead of pointing out
and outward. Yeah.
There's a really interesting Gnostic text from the Nag Hammadi, and I believe it's called the Second Discourse of Great Seth. It might be the first discourse of Great Seth. If you're opening up your Nag Hammadi, just be aware of that. But it is basically a channeled text from the point of view of Christ, and it was probably written like, I don't particularly even believe that Christ was necessarily like just one guy or something, but
yeah,
like maybe 2nd century or 1st century, and so it's from the point of view of Christ, and it says there's a passage in it that says something like, I entered the body and evicted the occupant, and he was no longer himself, but I was him. It's basically like Jesus, the spirit that is Jesus, narrating, like kicking the person out of the body of Jesus and then being indwelling in that as Jesus. And that's how that worked. It's really interesting.
Is this in the, how there's like a whole bunch of those Gnostic texts that are just online? Is this one of those?
Yeah. It's the Nag Hammadi. You can get the Nag Hammadi online, the Nag Hammadi library. You know what? As a matter of fact, let me look it up right now, because the passage is really cool.
I mean, that's so crazy that is literally something that's woven into Gnostic texts.
Yeah, and it's really interesting that ends up in one of those lost books that was sitting in like a trash heap in the desert, or some barren terrain for so long, and was only dug up in 1945. Like that was just waiting for the right moment to come, I think.
I like the idea that it was a dumpster.
Yeah, and they started burning it. The family that found it started burning it because they needed to warm their house. And then they realized, like, oh shit, these are scrolls. It's like, what got burnt? Really wild.
Yeah, there was some hand in that. I don't know what. It was like, oh, that one's a little too embarrassing. We need that one to go.
Right. I'm not gonna be able to look it up right now. It's fine. Yes, but it can be. You can find it online. It's really cool.
Man, that's really insane. And that's crazy that it directly ties um, into the experience I had. Uh, and there was a couple of those of like, there was another one that I think it was the second or third day where it was like, I was like, am I going to be Jesus again? Is this what it's going to happen? And because it kind of started and I was like embodied in like a tavern. And I was like, and then I realized I'm a Roman soldier. And then we go outside and then it's actually right across Christ speaking in the streets. And then it eventually turns out that like I'm the spear bearer that kills.
Oh yeah, Saint Longinus or Longinus.
That's it. Yes, Saint Longinus. Eventually, it turns out that that's who. And like I'm like, what is this? This is nuts. And the fact that this is like, and that's also another thing that it's hard for me to know. Like, would these experiences be as intense if I wasn't as like I spent most of my life like in the imaginal. Like I'm very imagination driven. That along with like I had done like a couple of years of like intense like psychedelic stuff, psychedelic in a journeying spiritual context, and so I wonder like even doing like the thing that first blew me away was was the archangel summoning, and after they happened, I was like, this is literally like this is like a DMT experience, but all you're doing is saying a prayer. You're drawing a bunch of squiggles, and you're maybe setting a rock on it, and then you're saying, and then it's like right there, and then you're touching. I don't even know what you're touching. Some sort of strange fundamental aspect of reality. I don't know, but the fact that it's right there, and I remember the person that was leading that group.
Yeah. Okay. So for someone that might not be familiar, could you describe what that looks like?
Oh, okay. I'm trying to remember the name of the text. It's actually very common. It's woven into a bunch of different like grimoires. I think like what's his name? Rufus Opus's Seven Spheres is like built off of it or something. But it's like I can't remember the name of the text. But it's something about like drawing spirits into crystals. I think it's part of the name of it.
Yeah.
Do you know the actual name of it offhand?
I feel like the name of the text is drawing spirits into crystals.
Spirits into crystals.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and it has different prayers for different archangels. And these prayers are like these, it's like a 3-page run-on sentence.
I love those.
And you just start and go and you don't stop. And the particular person that I first did this with, the guy was like trained as like a Buddhist monk. So he was reading this like very like specific like drone, and it has this hypnotic effect as you're listening to it, and it just goes on and on and on. And it was funny, before he started to say the prayer, he was like, "You're gonna have, once it's done, you're gonna have about 8 minutes with the spirit." And sure enough, like after like the actual experience, it was 8 minutes, and it was like that, like, because he would actually hit a tone, like a chime, when the time was up. But what was fascinating is that every time the spirit encounter ended, it would end first, and then the chime would happen. So
that's cool. Yeah.
I don't know. It's just so much of this is so strange. And the fact, there's another thing I realized about so much of magic is that and Gordon, I think, has talked about this a little bit. I think you could literally just completely be honest and forthright with people about all this. And 90% of people are going to be like, this guy's crazy. Yeah. 10% are going to be like, that's amazing, and never do anything about it. Like they'll, and I was like that for a very long time, where I just sat at the edge of this, like reading, and I'm like, this is really interesting. And it was like very theoretical, but then once you like step in and fall into it, it's like, holy shit.
So can you talk a little bit about what that looked like for you? How did you fall in? When did you jump in? How did you fall in? To the Mystic River?
I think it's like that quote, very slowly and all at once. It's hard to differentiate, because since my early childhood, I've had like imaginary friends and all that stuff. And like I've said, I've always worked in the imagination and doing creativity. So that was always a very active part of my life. And it wasn't, and then I've always sort of held like the metaphysical, like it's always been an interest. And like, I always read like fantasy novels, and like, I was always obsessed with, I was always obsessed with fantasy art. Actually, I was probably more obsessed with it than I was like, I remember I had like some Dungeons and Dragons books, and I never played the games. I just looked at the pictures. Oh, that crew. There's some
such good fantasy art.
Well, the first four that I think of is like the kind of the original pillars of that thing was Clyde Caldwell, Jeff Easley, Larry Elmore, and there's one other guy. Oh no, and I'm Keith Parkinson. And then later, a guy named like Brahm, he became like really, really. He was the next one that I think really stood out. And then after that, I'm not sure. I actually knew people that worked for them. But like those four in particular, I really enjoyed Larry Elmore at the time. I don't know if any of these names you recognize them at all.
No, I was hoping to recognize some, but I didn't. It's cool because I just learned them now, so I'm going to look them all up.
Who were you thinking of?
I was thinking of like John Howe. Like Lord of the Rings stuff is where I kind of
John Alan Lee.
Yes, yeah.
Alan Lee, Brian Froud. Yeah, it's funny. Those guys are at a kind of a different level. They're like, I mean, as great as like those Dungeons and Dragons guys are. Like Brian Froud and Alan Lee and John Howard. Like
I could like look at that stuff forever because I, obviously like huge Lord of the Rings fan too. Like you'd have to be to find out about those guys, but I don't know, or maybe not.
What's funny is like even. Well, I'm sure you've seen the Fairies book.
I don't think I have.
Oh, you don't know that book? That's so that's Alan Lee and Brian Froud.
Okay, I'll check that one out too.
You know Brian Froud, right?
Nope.
Oh shit. Okay, so Brian Froud, basically the entirety of both Dark Crystal and Labyrinth are him.
Oh wow, awesome. Okay, so I know him. I just didn't know him.
Yeah. He's like. And this is funny because I have this whole thing about like in the 70s and the 80s, there's a group of like artists and illustrators that were really, as far as like the mainstream pop culture, they're really the core of the wellspring of the imagination that influenced like the look of everything up until today. And it was a group of people that like, it kind of like, I don't know that there's anyone that quite has their level of talent. And don't get me wrong, there's very talented people, but for some reason, this group of people, so Alan Lee is one of them. John Howe is another one. Brian Froud is definitely a huge one. Mobius.
Yeah, no Mobius for sure.
Yeah. H.R. Giger.
Oh yeah.
Sid Mead.
Oh, that's familiar.
Sid Mead was the main concept artist for Blade Runner.
Oh, hell yeah. Okay.
And he was another one of these, like he was basically like a 3D modeling computer with gouache and pencil in the the fact, like the dude would do this complex, like, cause he loved like perspective and he could do this all by hand. He would draw like the surface of a car and then he could determine like what the reflection of the surrounding space would be into the, like he would paint like a chrome car and it would be reflecting the whole world around it. And
you have to be in that world to be able to do that, right?
Yeah.
Like, you have to be transported into that world to be able to even do that. So anyone that, you know what I mean?
Yes.
Anyone that wants to question that, I would just say, well, how would that be possible if that person wasn't going there?
Well, and it's funny because I've talked to, I've had this discussion with a lot of different artists and illustrators, and they have a term for, I forget who was saying this, and he was like, some people are just projectors, meaning that it's just like the hand goes down and then it works, and it's like, because, and I can honestly attest to this, like you don't think it's like straight, the flow is straight through when it's like really going. So yeah, it is very much like you are in this reality and channeling it.
Writing is like that for me too. I feel like just grabbing it out of the air or something. Like when I'm in the zone writing, it's just not me. Or I'm participating in something with something else. You know what I mean? Maybe a better way to put it.
Yeah, I think there's a tension there, and I think you have to hold them in balance, because
I have to get out of my way.
You do have to do that, but you also have to understand that, like, because I remember meeting, I did one of the, like, a RuneSuit meetup, and I was talking to this girl who was like, she was very young, and she was doing a similar thing, like she was doing creative work, and then she was like very despondent, because she was like, I don't always have the thing you're talking about, like the flow. And I'm like, oh, well, the flow or the inspiration, right? And I'm like, if you just wait for that could come and go at will. You have to understand that you're also a part of this. So yes, there's that inspiration and that flow, but there's also the component of you doing the work.
Yeah, sitting in the chair and
yeah, and you know, sometimes with writing, for instance, it's often the editing. Like, it's you editing, not the fucking muse like coming through and like
the
dancing
muse
on your
off for the
yeah. It's like, that shit's hard. That's on you.
And it's like all shadow work. Even when I edit this podcast, it is just me doing this shadow work of listening to my own voice and counting the times that I say you know what I mean?
My God, I have never thought of it that way, but you were 1,000% accurate. It's total shadow work.
It is, but I think that's really, I mean, it has to be done.
You're 100. Oh my God, I've never put that in context, but it's 100% that, because you're stuck with yourself.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh.
And not only that, but a lot of the time I'm like having to kill my children or something, you know? Like,
yes.
Really? Because I'm having to cut out, like, maybe there's a whole scene that isn't working. And I'm like, I really liked that scene, but alas, it doesn't flow in the story. Yeah.
Well, sometimes it's like that, and you may find this is like those little chunks that you pull out end up growing into their own things.
Oh, yeah.
Are like attaching to something else. Because I've noticed this, and it's very weird. It's like suddenly I was like, this isn't. Oh, this belongs with this thing. Yeah.
David Lynch has some cool stuff to say about that.
I have sadly never read that fishing book.
I haven't either, but there's a pretty good, and he must have done it at the same time as he was like maybe doing promotion for the book, because it's just like a lecture he's giving about that whole thing, and he's talking about the ideas as seeds, and you're collecting the seeds, and you keep the seeds because you never know when one day that's going to come back. That's what it reminded me of, kind of what you were talking about.
That's totally nice. It's there's a really great book. It was actually like it was like a series about directors, and it was usually like the director's name on the director's. So there was like Lynch on Lynch, there was Cronenberg on Cronenberg, Burton on Burton, Scorsese on Scorsese. So it's all these interviews, and there's a really amazing one. The Lynch one that I recommend anybody. It's like just an amazing book about creativity, and that dude is like, fates have touched him or something. I don't know.
Oh yeah, he's hooked up to the main vein.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I concur. There's a story in there because he started out like studying painting in like, I forget where he's from. He's from like Missouri or something. Some really like, he's from there, like some Midwest state. And it's him and like his buddy, and they're showing their paintings to their teacher, and they're still wet. And his friend shows it to the teacher first, and the teacher gives his critique, and then it's like, hey, well, David, do you have anything? And he's like, yeah, and he pulls out his painting, and as soon as he pulls it out to show it to the teacher, a moth comes in, lands into the wet paint, flips around, and dies. And he was like, Lynch is like, whoa. And it's like suddenly the painting was finished and that thing has continued in his work up until today. And if you ever look at his, any of his like contemporary fine art, he does stuff like this where he'll leave like rolled up like ham and bread on the surface, and he'll have ants come and eat it all. And then he'll like dump like epoxy resin on the ants and freeze them and make them a part of the image. So he has this real, and it's sort of like really, I mean, that's a very direct way of being in relation to the reality and co-creating. I mean, it's remarkable.
Yeah, that's a cool story. So I'm going to get you back on track. You were talking about how you jumped into this. Into the waters. Yeah, it's cool though. I love when we kind of go on a little side quest.
I'm going to see if I can just keep this on tangents and never get back on track. Let's see. No, I think it was really, I was always sort of dabbling. And then as I got older, I dabbled more and more. And I've always had these weird things. I remember when I graduated design school, my now ex-girlfriend, she was like, what do you think you want? And I was like, I want a job with a startup company, with not a lot of people, where I can have a lot of influence over what we're doing. And like, we're just out of college. And she's like, that'll never happen. And it's funny, she went on like 9,000 interviews. Took her, I don't know how many to get a job. I did 3. And on the third one, it was exactly what I asked for. And I was like, oh, I think I'm getting this job. And I knew it. And she was like, you're not going to go for any more interviews? And I'm like, nah, I think I have this job. And sure enough, like 2 weeks later, they're like, you're hired. And I don't know what it was like. I just called it. Like I knew that that's what was going to happen. And I've had instances of that. The thing that I stumbled across is like, if I get into like a kind of like an automatic writing situation, and I kind of state what I want in that automatic writing, they'll sometimes happen. And that was sort of my earliest like excursion into this, where it was like, that's basically magic. It's a 1-to-1, but I don't understand on a larger context what's happening, but I know that there's something here. And I think it was actually after I broke up with that ex, and then I was like, I really need to I need to change my life. I met a group of people that were like doing plant medicine. Basically, they were doing these like psychedelic excursions. It was this one particular shaman person who led it, and one of the most remarkable people I've ever met. Honestly, like the first time I met him, he was like, we were talking and chatting, and he was like, what do you think you want out of this? And I'm like, I think I want to like be able to get out of my own way, and like to be able to not like self-judge or something. And he did this thing where he was just like, he took both of his hands and put them on my torso, like on my chest and the back, like basically like sandwiching my heart. And I felt this crazy surge from the bottom of my feet all the way up to the top of my head. And then this like feeling of well-being, like just spring out and like inflate my body out from my heart. And I had never experienced anything like that in my entire life. And I'm like, okay, I'm definitely going to go and do work with this guy. And I think it was sort of, I don't remember, it was probably around then when I also discovered Rune Soup. And I don't remember exactly when the membership came online. I don't know the exact, but I was one of the first people. And it was funny because it came out of Reddit/r occult.
Nice.
Yeah. And actually, to go even further back, I think some of the earliest things I dove into was like the disinfo books. I don't know if you remember those.
I know of them, but I haven't read them.
Okay. So yeah, there was like the disinformation guide to everything. I think was maybe there was like volume 1 and 2. And in one of those, I think is the like Grant Morrison pop magic thing. And
oh yeah. Okay. So I've seen his talk at the Disinfo conference.
Yeah. And so this was sort of like a version of that in text.
Cool.
And I think this was actually before he did that conference. And like, it was always this thing that was kind of on the edge, the periphery of my life and what I did. But then it only became front and center probably within the last 5-6 years, maybe. And this is when, like, especially in relation to those like psychedelic journeys and diving into the Rune Soup membership, that's when it really became a much more prominent part of my life and a focus. And it's funny because it's actually just the thing you start to realize is it's just actually being in reality.
Right.
Like
it's being aware.
Yeah. Yeah. Like actually aware.
Yeah.
And it's funny, the whole like Gnostic black iron prison and the like beautiful world of reality is the same world. It's just the peeling of the scales away.
The peeling of the scales is a great way to put it. I was going to say just a different pair of glasses.
Yeah. And I think the idea of the archonic idea of the archonic is literally it's a self-perpetuating prison. And it's the idea of like the materialist idea that you're a meat machine separated from reality and isolated. This isolated mistake. And it's really just a mental thing.
Yeah. And, it's funny because there's the like becoming really popular, the theory of like the simulation, that we're in a simulation. And, the Gnostics kind of had this idea too of like of a matrix, but it's a spiritual matrix. If it comes down to me, you don't need any of that, because if I can convince you that the world is this way, then you're going to experience that way and you're going to see it that way. And I'm in effect running that false program without any of that stuff, just with if I can control your perceptions.
You're the reality tunnels.
Yeah.
As Robert Anton Wilson would say, like, yeah, like you're jamming people into, and it's the trickiest set of fetters, because like it honestly took like ayahuasca to break it for me. Really break it. Like it was thinking because there's a thing where I think in our culture where we confuse information with knowledge. Like they're not the same thing. Like you think because you have the information you understand something, but that's not that's not actually understanding. That's not actual knowledge. Knowledge is actually experiencing and knowing the thing. So for me, it was like, I thought I read all this stuff, see the Matrix or whatever. Like you think you understand that, but then when you're actually confronted with it, it's like a whole other thing. It's a whole other level. And then once you're broken out of that, that's even like, I don't even know how to describe that.
Yeah, I don't either. I think The Invisibles does a really good job of trying to,
yeah,
yeah, experience. And like you said, a knowledge, a knowing, the gnosis. Like, that's why I really don't even. People kind of want to ask me about Gnosticism sometimes and try to explain it to them, but I'm like, man, it doesn't really matter because my version of it is not going to really do much for you. It was my experience of it. Like, everyone has their own, Yeah. That's why I like to pluralize it, and I just say Gnosticisms.
I mean, yeah. I think that was kind of their point, right? Was
right.
That like, we're just trying to get you to actually experience this stuff, not theorize about it.
And and not only is information mistaken for knowledge, but I would venture to say that wisdom is mistaken for foolishness. But that's kind of how it's always been, I think.
Well, right? That's the most powerful card in the tarot, probably.
Right.
And it's funny because there's in Taoism, there's this state called Wu Ji, which is and part of the meditative practice is you stand Wu Ji. It's the standing meditation practice. And the whole thing is about like finding the balance between all these different tensions. And what it's really doing is it's like, it's the same idea as I think in physics, they have this idea of the 0 point, this place that exists everywhere in the universe if you can only touch it, which is like you could access infinite energy. And the reason for that is because it's infinite potential. And you only get there by basically returning to the full, like going back to zero, going back to nothing. And then you become like endless potential. I'm not sure where I'm going with this.
It reminds me too of like Socrates. That's how he would talk to people. And he would just say, well, I don't know anything. So you're going to have to tell me, and he would get them to say these things that, but really he would just always claim that he didn't know anything. And it really pisses people off. If you want to ever try to use it, it's kind of awesome. Yeah, I think that's what the cross is that point of omnidirectional potentiality. I think that taps into that idea somewhat, and that's why that's such a powerful symbol that's been used.
Oh, that's that's true, because it is the crossroads, and it's the same as like it overlaps with all these other different concepts. Like it's problematic probably to talk about, but like the medicine wheel too, and the 4 directions, and then like. But I mean, it's this fundamental thing of like placing yourself in space.
Yeah.
And connecting with like the axis mundi, right?
The ancestral healing stuff that Daniel Four does is cool in that way too, because he likes to use the mandala family tree, which places you in the middle, and then you have your 4 lines in each direction. That's really cool. Same idea, right?
Yeah, it's interesting that the 4 directions are just so fundamental to any sort of ritual or magical practice. Like you almost always have to declare it before you get started. I guess it's just about the specificity. Is like I'm here. I'm here both in place and time.
I'm here and I mean to be here, baby.
Yeah. This is purpose. I'm not just stumbling through. I'm doing this on purpose. Yeah. Which I guess gets into like intent and like, how that is such a huge component of all of this too, the idea of intention. And I guess that goes to the idea of will. I don't know.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah. I don't know. Did I answer your question of like?
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you a follow-up question, and that was going to be, do you want to talk to me about some of your imaginary friends when you were a kid or anything like that? What were you afraid of? What were you afraid of when you were a kid?
What was I afraid of?
Were you afraid of anything?
Everything.
Yeah, me too.
I was afraid of everything. I was afraid of the dark. I was afraid of heights. I was afraid of dogs. What wasn't I afraid of? I'm trying to think. Yeah. And it's funny because I think that drew me to like horror and darkness. I read Lovecraft really early.
Man, that was the first thing I even read, man. I wouldn't read really until I found Lovecraft, and I was off to the races.
Do you remember how old you were?
Man, I was in like middle school.
Same.
So,
okay.
Which is what is that age? I'm not good at this.
Yeah, no, me neither. I'm terrible.
Maybe like early adolescence.
Yeah, it was around there. It was.
So that's really cool to hear that from you, man, because
I was. It's actually, it's funny. Some of the earliest things I remember was because there was a Lovecraft collection that my father bought, and I remember it had this cover by, and actually I later met this guy, Michael Whalen. I don't know if you know him. He's a famous.
But I might know his work because I love the covers of all the Lovecraft stuff. That was one of my favorite things. I would collect the books even though they had the same stories.
Okay, so this particular collection had all the covers, and at this era, all the covers were these black and white paintings with like red highlights. So famously, like there was this one had a wraparound that was sort of a collection of all the other individual books, and so it was like there's like this guy like hanging from a tree wrapped in spider webs, and there was all these spiders over him with like red abdomens and everything.
Yes, I remember that one vividly.
You remember that? And then there was like this giant like eye with like it was almost like a thumb shaped pupil that was like black, and that was red. So that was the edition that my father bought. And I remember I constantly looked at that cover and I was like, what is this? And like my dad would tell me about it. He was like, oh, he's this author. He's like, it was very influential. I don't even remember exactly what my father said. He was just like, because I think my dad was trying to become a writer. Like he wrote like, through my childhood, he was a landlord, but mostly what he did is he like the managing the apartments was just to sort of fund him to try to become a writer. And so he had this office in our garage, and he would write there every day. And he collected a stack of books, and I guess he wanted to write a horror novel. So, and of course, like Lovecraft is the guy. You know, he's who you reference. And I remember the first story of his I read was The Haunter in the Dark. Do you know that one?
Yep.
Yeah, where the hunters that end up like sleeping in the same bed, and then there's a guy in the middle, and whatever it is that's stalking them, like takes the guy to his left and then takes the guy to his right, and like I think he ends up running away at the end. I don't remember exactly how it ends, but I also remember there was like it had a giant eye with like 3 lobes or something. I remember that little detail. But what was funny is that like I would and so I was drawn to that, but I was also probably drawn to it because I was also obsessed with like horror movies. Like one of my very earliest memories is watching through a keyhole the chest burster scene of Alien.
Love it. Oh yeah.
And I think I was like 4.
Yeah, we were early on that stuff too, me and my brother. That's awesome.
And you know, and this was I don't think kids are allowed to do any of this at all anymore. I don't know if this is quite a thing. Everyone I know that has kids, they keep them away from this stuff. Whereas like my dad didn't give a shit. I remember
ours didn't either.
Yeah, I think we saw just about every Nightmare on Elm Street movie in theaters. My favorite was The Dream Warriors. Did you ever see that?
Yeah. Cool.
Which is it's also this excellent, weird, hallucinogenic, strange movie.
Yeah.
But I remember seeing it it was me and like my older cousins and then also my younger cousins.
Nice.
Maybe like 3 or 4 years younger than me. And I'm like maybe 12. And I'm like,
these are great days.
Yeah.
Okay, so speaking of Dream Warriors, I think my favorite parts of Lovecraft were like the dream cycle and like the Randolph Carter and those, like the Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath.
I never read those. I always meant to, and I never did.
Okay, so they were like fantasy stories, but they all took place in the dream world. So Randolph Carter was this kind of like Coleridge-esque. He's pretty much an occultist, right? And he would like smoke hashish and opium or what have you. I can't remember which one it was. And then go to sleep and take astral flights or whatever you want to call it, journeys. Yeah, they're really cool stories. I highly recommend you check them out because they're very pertinent to your interests based on what we're talking about.
I will definitely. You know, what's funny is that I know they're influenced by this other guy, Lord Dunsey or Dernsey.
Oh yeah, Dunsany.
Dunsany, that's it. It blows my mind, like all those guys, because this speaks to like kind of how like I was talking about. There was this creative source that was all these illustrators that ended up influencing all of like movies and pop culture for decades. That era of pulp writer around Lovecraft, like all the people that surrounded him, they were kind of like the nascent version of what came. Actually, it's still reverberating in our pop culture now. Like so much of what's bubbled up to become mainstream started with those guys in the like 20s or 30s. And it all sort of circles around Lovecraft because he had this like extensive, it was like basically the chat room of the time was sending letters to each other.
Right.
Yeah. And he has this like ridiculous library. He was like a prolific letter writer. I had a whole collection that was just his correspondence with Robert E. Howard, who wrote Conan.
Oh, that's so cool. I would love to read that. Oh my God.
I mean,
like everything I love about everything.
And it's kind of
except for sometimes I twinge to hear Lovecraft's private thoughts, but fuck it.
Well, I mean, I think even that's interesting, like to know.
Oh,
yeah, like how fucked up kind of people were back then. When I discovered that existed, I was like, I am definitely reading this because that's insane that these guys knew each other. I don't know. I don't know. Also, in some way, I think we're in some strange way an outgrowth of that. If you think about it.
Oh yeah.
Because we're sort of we're bubbling up in the rhizome of rune soup, as it were.
Right. Which is that goes back to that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been reading the Simon Necronomicon. And
I've never. What is that like?
It's cool. I mean, it's also Peter Levenda. Probably he says he didn't write it, but probably because it was more channeled than anything else. But it's cool, and I mean it's like kind of situated within Babylonian and Chaldean magic. But then it has the Lovecraft connection too. And I had some really strange synchronicities regarding it. And I always kind of was like, oh, that's fake.
Yeah.
Until I realize that doesn't matter. Like it's all fake. Like it's all someone's lens on it. Like
Yes.
to me, one of the truest things that's ever been written is Lord of the Rings.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
there's so much in it that's truer than reality, truer than true, or however you want to put it, because it taps to that mythical level that's able to be that true.
Yeah. It's sort of like, it's like if you say this is pretend, you can actually get to reality better.
Right.
Because it's removing, it kind of goes back to the idea of like that Gnostic, the archonic lens or whatever. It's pushing that aside. And it's like we have to pretend to leap over this barrier.
I like that.
To get to the reality. Oh man, that was making me think of something else. And now I can't. I've never. So there's two things about that Simon's Necronomicon is like, I've always like, if you read Lovecraft, why would you want to actually engage with these things?
Right.
That never made any sense to me. But also, two, like that symbol that's on the cover, which is that weird, like sigil, the circular thing. I remember I ran across. It was funny. I was getting coffee at this coffee shop that's like in my neighborhood that's like around the corner, and there was a guy in front of me in line who had that symbol tattooed on his arm, like his forearm. And after I ordered my coffee, I turned to him as he was picking up his, and I was like, "Simon's Necronomicon, huh?" And he was like, "Yeah," and he nodded, and I swear to God, it felt like this internal string, like my spirit go boom. And I'm like, did that dude just do something? What the fuck was that?
Man, that's cool. That's one of those encounters where I'm like, yeah, that wasn't a human.
Maybe not.
It was a person, but might not have been a human. That's cool. So in my opinion, and I want to do some rereading of Lovecraft with this lens. But so why you would want to do that is because now and in this time of my life, I can look at it and see that these like brown occultists that were summoning otherworldly beings are actually like, oh shit, maybe they're the good guys.
Okay.
Like, they're cavorting down there in New Orleans. It's like kind of like listening to your grandma talk about what they were doing in jazz bars. And you're like, well, that sounds like fun.
Oh, interesting. So it's actually that, okay. So the Lovecraft
but with the same horror twinge, like I'm not taking it lightly either. Right.
Well, it's actually,
but what it really is it's the first part of it, or I haven't finished it. I'm still kind of chewing my way through it. But So the first part of the operation is basically like a Chaldean mystery school, like going to each planet until you've reached, I think the last one is Saturn. I think I want to say it's the sun in the Chaldean one, but I think in this one it's Saturn. I don't know. But yeah, you might be right. Did you say Saturn?
I said Saturn, and that's only because
you're probably right because it's
the reason I say that is because that's how it was in the Seven Spheres. That little green book that's by Rufus Opus.
Yeah, I haven't read it.
It's this. That was an early operation I did. Was that I operated on that book. I actually didn't get a lot out of it. I'd be curious.
Sometimes just the doing it is the best.
At
least I did it.
Yeah, is the most important thing. I'd be curious to revisit it now. I wonder what it would be like now going through it.
Yeah, but so the first part of it is that, and it's like, so these are the zoned ones, and once you've communed with all the zoned ones, then you go to the Azanai, the unzoned ones, which I think are like fixed stars, but it's got a Lovecraftian lens to it. It feels right, It's just got like, it's got that that hint of, but you could lose your mind. So, you have to do these sigils against the watchers at the threshold and stuff, like when you're going out into these realms, like other things are going to kind of come after you, like a Hounds of Tindalos style trap, that you're, I don't know. It does sound kind of like, oh, this is like for real. But it makes me want to do it more. Like basically the same folly that befell every Lovecraft protagonist, right? It's that like Faustian thirst for knowledge leading to untold horrors. John Carpenter is so much in that vein too, right?
Oh, for sure. I love him too. He's another like favorite of mine. I think The Thing is one of the best horror movies ever made.
Oh, it's my top 5 of movies just in general, I think.
It actually might be the best Lovecraftian movie ever made.
Yeah, it's got the best tentacles.
Yeah, those monsters are incredible.
They're so scary.
There's
a body horror aspect to it.
Yeah, and it's funny how old that movie is, and then like they still hold up. Because I remember I introduced people to that movie like 3 years ago, and they were blown away. Like it's still that like, yeah, it's a great. There was a spate of them. There was like the 3, what I think are the 3 of the best horror movies ever made, and they're all 3 monster movies, which is John Carpenter's The Thing, Cronenberg's The Fly,
nice,
and then Alien, actually, I mean, Giger could be a whole podcast on it.
Yeah. He was channeling something too, for sure.
It's funny. He's the only artist, because I also encountered him very, very early, because I was, obviously the chestburster thing, but then later there was this magazine Starlog. I don't know if you ever remember this thing.
No, but it sounds great.
It was this sci-fi magazine. So it was like kind of how like there's Fangoria for horror. There was Starlog for science fiction. And so it was always like, at the era, it was like shit like Battlestar Galactica and Star Wars and Star Trek and everything. And in the back of those magazines, there was these ads for books on H.R. Giger, and the advertising image was always his concept painting for the Alien, the profile one, where it's kind of got the like phallus thing coming out of its mouth, there was only like a couple other images that would kind of show up occasionally, and he was also this sort of like forbidden thing, because the other thing about his books, I don't know if have you ever seen them in person, the H.R. Giger books?
What do you mean? I mean, I've seen books of H.R. Giger, but are you talking about like he had?
There was ones that were published by something called Gallery Morpheus, which was just basically him. They represented a couple artists later, but it was majority of him, and they were way oversized. They were probably like 11 by 17 or 13 by 19. They were like really big books, and they sort of like, they were of such a size that they kind of only existed on a shelf by themselves.
Yeah.
And like you're coming at it, I was younger, so I was a kid. So they were gigantic. And it was, I remember I kept trying to engage with the books. My dad would take me to there's this bookshop called the Sci-Fi and Mystery Bookshop in Atlanta. Long gone. But they had his books on like a mid to top shelf. But I was always scared to pick them up and open them, because it was like this thing where I was like, I'm not supposed to be looking at those. So I was like being a good kid and staying away. And I got to a certain age where like me and my dad would go to a bookstore, Oxford Books. I don't remember. You remember Oxford Books?
Yeah, I remember Oxford Books.
It was, for those that don't know, it was one of the most amazing bookstores in the world. It was in Atlanta, and it only existed for I don't know how long. But it was this giant cavernous place that like made no sense. I don't know who like it was laid out by like a degenerate or something. It was laid out by a Lovecraftian a sufferer.
That's a good bookshop.
Where it was just this like cavernous labyrinth of I don't, if there was organization, I couldn't tell.
As it should be.
As it should be. I think it was sort of like 4 different buildings jammed together. But eventually we were in there, and I was old enough to where like I could wander off on my own. And I went to one of the the information kiosks that the people were sitting behind, and I was like, "Do you have any books by H.R. Giger?" And the guy was like, yeah, I'm not sure if you should look at them." But he was like, "Okay, they're over there." He pointed me out to him, and I went and looked at them, and I took them off the shelf, and I remember they're one of the only pieces of art that made me nauseous when I first encountered them. Now I'm at a point where like I can just, they're like, I've been desensitized, so they're not.
That's important to me though. But so put a pin in that and continue.
Okay. Yeah. So, but I just remembered because I mean he goes into some really dark, fucked up places.
Right.
And what's funny is if you ever see interviews with him, he's this like fucking goofball. He's this Swedish goofball who's like dressed. He's like, "I'm a vampire," but he's such a like silly ass. But he legitimately tapped into this very like dark undercurrent. And what's funny, he was potent to me, and I was like, he's one of those artists that sort of just come out of nowhere, right? So there's this steady stream of art, and then you get these occasional people that pop up that are like, where did this come from? Like H.R. Giger is really one of these guys where it's like, what the fuck is this? Like,
yeah, that shit's from another planet.
Yeah, it's literally. But what was funny is that I eventually, in college, I started studying Northern Renaissance art, and there's a couple of select guys. I encountered this term. I love it. It's Latin. It's horror vacui. Horror vacui, which means a fear of empty spaces. And it was in reference to the fact that Northern Renaissance paintings would have no empty restful space. They would fill every inch of them with something. So there was like this, so they were very like dense and cluttered. And Giger, being Swiss, is sort of a continuation of this tradition of like, because he's like, I start in one corner and I go to another, and he just like, he doesn't like design it so that there's restful space. He just fills the whole thing. It's like he's scared of something not being there, and he's sort of tapping into this. And there's a couple of select painters. The one that stood out is this guy Franz Flores. You can look it up, and he did these paintings of like demons and hell, and it's just these humans like and creatures like just jammed together in this canvas. Like the canvas is just dense with people and things. And I'm like, oh, there's still something he's carrying through. Like, so he's not completely out of nowhere, but he's still his own thing. But there's still sort of this weird tradition that's winding its way further back. But yeah, I still think he's amazing. He's sort of like, I don't know. It's weird. He's influential to like 90% of like horror and alien video games like are based on him.
Because the first time, and it's interesting too, because I have a sort of similar story where I remember being in, I think it was like maybe like a Sears when they sold everything, or maybe, I don't know. It was in Michigan when I was very young, and I don't remember what store it was, but it was in like the video game toy section, and it was a Giger work, and I remembered it.
Is it a computer game?
It might have been a computer game. Yeah.
Darkseid?
I don't know, but I just remember seeing it. I'll have to look it up.
Okay.
After this, and if I see it, it's going to blow my mind. But I just remember seeing just like a poster of it, but it's stuck in my mind forever. just going through the whole thread of my life, it was like something that I kind of always looked back on. And I didn't really even think about this until you mentioned that. And I'm kind of like resurfacing that memory. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because a lot of that early stuff is very foggy to me. But
Yeah.
I remember it making me have this feeling that I couldn't describe at all.
Yeah.
It was just like some kind of itch, or like you said, it made you gag.
Like nauseous. Yes.
Nauseous. Yeah.
Yes. And it's
I
really
think that all good, everything that I really like, if I experience it maybe early enough, or maybe when I'm not ready for it yet, or maybe that's just the transgression that brings it into my soul space, but it kind of will initially register as a disgust almost, or because it's an other at that moment until you kind of, you know where I'm going with that.
Yes, I do, because it's taboo.
Yeah.
It's something.
It
it's
rips the veil
away. Yeah, it's and it's funny because like as you're describing the feeling, like where you put your hands in front of your body, I'm like, that's exactly where I felt that.
And it's like the solar plexus type area, right?
Yeah, this like weird, like churning, like whoa, and but there's something about it, like you can't turn away, and you want to go more. You want to see more of it. Yeah. And like, I might have to put it away, but I'm not going to stop. I'm going to come back to this.
That's why I like to ask what you're afraid of when you're a kid, because I was so afraid of all these things that I'm obsessed with now, but continue.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, and so he sort of, what's funny is I've had psychedelic journeys that basically will briefly turn into Giger's face.
Oh, cool.
And
also scary.
Well, what's funny is that I'm like, oh, okay. Like they don't frighten me at all. I'm like, oh, cool.
I love it. Yeah.
I'm in fucking Giger's face again. I remember that there was one that was, it was a mushroom. Actually, this was crazy. They used to do, there was in that group, they had this this thing that was a combination chocolate that was supposed to be psilocybin and ayahuasca together. I don't. They called it Ma. I actually, I'm probably talking out of turn. I don't know if I'm supposed to talk about this, but whatever. That's what they said it was. If that's what it was, I don't know, but it definitely like fucking threw me into outer space. But it was funny because one of the things was like, it threw me into this like very gory, weird H.R. Giger, like fleshy gray forms moving into each other. And I remember like seeing almost like this wolf thing. And then it was like the mushrooms or whatever grabbed it and smashed it into my face and like crushed it and like smeared it across my my vision. And I was just like, okay. And I'm like, I guess you're taking care of that for me. I don't know. But what was funny is later on in the trip, like the space sort of changed into this like weird, like almost like kaleidoscope hyper reality. And at some point that thing that had been smeared fell down almost like it was like a dead dog from the rafters or something. And then like sort of bounced off shit. And it was just like, it was such a like, I know it doesn't sound it. It was fucking hilarious.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So like what I got out of that was like, this is stuff that I think if other people would probably be freaked out if they were experiencing this. But meanwhile, I'm like, oh, this is cool. Like, show me weird, like mauled, fucked up teeth, deformed things. Like that doesn't bother me. I'm totally okay with it. And yeah, I don't, it's funny. I haven't really thought about that stuff in a long time. but it is kind of this weird, like I have a comfort with that reality. And the thing is like, did that reality exist before Giger? Yeah.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Did he tap into it, or did he? I think there's definitely like a co-creation going on too, because like you said, it involves both the muse and the artist. And so, like, yeah, Giger was going into Giger space. Lovecraft was going into this dream world slash this very precariously situated Earth. Tolkien was going to Middle Earth, and they were going there, but the way that it's expressed through them is unique, kind of in the same way you're talking about how Giger was carrying a through line.
Mm-hmm.
Was carrying a tradition along of that fear of empty spaces, but it was brought through him in a totally new way.
New way, which actually,
it's kind of like the Fae and aliens if you think about it.
about it, yeah. And he's influenced by Lovecraft, right?
Oh, that makes sense.
Because two of his collections, one's called the Necronomicon, and the other one's Necronomicon 2. So I think he might have. There was even a painting of his called what's the city Cthulhu lives in, dreams in.
Really, yeah, or I don't know how to.
Really, yeah, I can't ever say it. That's why I was trying to get you to say it, so I wouldn't have to.
I will give it a shot. Really, yeah, that's how I was.
Really, yeah, yeah. I think he has a painting with that as its name. It's funny because like I remember in art college, like he's one of those guys that like everybody loves, but like he's not accepted by the mainstream because they don't know how to put him into historical context.
Yeah, and the mainstream hates that.
Yeah, so he just sort of sits on the outside.
Like, oh my gosh, how are we going to fit you into our arbitrary canon?
Yeah, exactly. And that's, yeah, you're not doing weird squares and fields of color, so we don't know what the fuck is going on. Although you're clearly tapping into something frightening, but we don't know. We're just going to avoid that. Yeah, it's really funny.
There was something else that I had, but I lost it, I think.
You'll find it again.
Yeah, it'll come back. How are you feeling about time, man? I feel like we've already talked for an hour and 20 minutes.
Oh, have we?
Yeah, which it doesn't feel like at all.
No. I'm good to go as long as you want.
You're good to, I mean, yeah, I'll go until we kind of aren't.
Until we run out of stuff.
I'll run out of steam at some point.
I think we should Rogan it. We should go full Joe Rogan and just keep going. We could.
Yeah, and then I won't edit it at all because I'll say fuck that.
I mean, I think at a certain point, it's like, I mean, it's more natural. I think. I don't know that we're stumbling over our words very much. So
yeah, no, I don't think so either.
I mean, what is it like editing these things? I don't even know.
I would take out the conversation that just occurred in the last 20 seconds where we're talking about editing it. You know what I mean?
Why? Why? Leave that in.
I don't know. You know what I mean? I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I leave that in. No, like I think
it does come down to more of a self-consciousness sometimes.
Yeah, and I totally get that, but I think there's something more fun about here's why I think you should leave that in, because that's part of the creative process. And part of the creative process is talking about the creative process.
Yeah.
And like, I
like that.
Every painting, if you flip around, is a piece of fucking canvas stapled to some wood. And that's just reality. And at some point, someone had to talk about making that ship sail and gluing it to a piece of wood. So I think it's okay to leave the raw stuff in, and I think it makes it more real, honestly. And then it's less work for you, and then and then you get to be lazy and say, "Oh no, it was total creative decision."
Absolutely, I was going to say that was actually what I was about to say. Was that I love this because not only is it a beautiful way of putting it, but it also allows me to do less.
Oh. Well, less is more, right?
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Right. and show don't tell. We're certainly going to show it.
You could just you could say that you're tapping into Taoism, and you're just letting it be,
being in the flow. Yeah.
Yes.
No, I like that idea. Anyway, I mean, honestly, like a lot of the stuff I listen to does the same thing. I can tell.
Yeah, I don't. Sometimes it becomes really apparent. Like you'll notice like a dramatic shift in the conversation, and it's like, oh, clearly something was spoken that they didn't want to. I think it's more often that it's not that they're worried about like revealing the seams of stuff. It's usually more like, oh, maybe we shouldn't have gone there, and then they'll cut the thing out. And I was actually curious. So when did you live in Atlanta originally? So you left and you just came back, more or less.
So I lived in Atlanta. So I grew up in Roswell, Georgia.
Okay.
And like Alpharetta area. And then I lived in Atlanta from like 2018. Not like long did I actually live downtown in Atlanta. I went and lived in a small town in middle Georgia for a while called Milledgeville for like 12 years. And I moved around a lot. I've always moved around a lot. It's kind of one of the side effects of being an alcoholic.
Okay.
A lot of what we call in the rooms a geographical. It's well known. It's like, oh, you did a geographical, huh? You crossed state lines, okay. Like, just say no more.
Is it something where okay? I'm really curious. If you're cool talking about it.
I love talking about it.
Okay, is it something to the effect of like is it that you the reason to move is it A, like embarrassment, or B, that you feel like, I don't know if embarrassment is even the right word.
Oh, it's probably like, a lot of it's embarrassment. It's like, oh yeah, I tapped this place out. I pissed off everyone I know here.
Okay, right? So that is some of it. It's like, I'm going to start over, and then maybe there's a hope that it'll be different.
Yeah, wherever you go, there you are, kind of thing. And to me, it was actually necessary to do some of these because it made me realize that that the problem drinking and problem drug use was a symptom of trying to run away from things. It wasn't the other way around. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
My unwillingness to face the reality of my life was the spiritual disease that was manifesting itself as drug addiction. So I am not one of those people that thinks it's a disease that you have for the rest of your life. You can recover,
Yeah.
And it's always like, yeah, I probably shouldn't. Like, I'm not like, there's stuff I won't do anymore, but it's a choice.
Yeah.
I get to choose now, and I just choose not to do those things because I know they usually under a bridge or something.
Yeah.
But I think it's a very shamanic thing too, is I think what a lot of addicts represent is a contingent of people that, okay, so for me, in my experience, it was necessary that I live on a spiritual basis or I would die. I had to come in contact with some power, with some source of power that would allow me to do what I knew was the thing I wanted to do and not keep doing what I didn't want to do, to put it in a biblical sense, right? That's the thorn in Paul's side. He talks about that. But so I needed some, but to put it simply, I was powerless because of just the condition I was in, and I needed some sort of connection to some kind of power that would allow me to change.
Because it couldn't come. There's no way to find it within. It was like, it was too beyond.
It was within.
It was, well,
I had it all along.
Yeah, no, that's not what I mean. I'm trying to differentiate.
So I think people pay people a lot of money for this sort of thing, and a lot of the time it doesn't do anything because you actually have to have a spiritual experience.
Yeah, okay.
I had to have a spiritual experience that would allow me to manifest change in my life.
But what I'm saying is that it's within, but connecting to a larger thing.
Yes.
Yes.
But so it does involve a short-term denial of self, like a mystery initiation, or like any kind of shamanic initiation. I hate to say any kind because I don't know, and that's problematic. But you know, the idea of going to the underworld and coming back with gifts. But in order to come back, I had to like
go into the darkness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I had to go all the way. And that's one of the things that Odin really tricked me into doing, was as a trickster god, but also as a patron of me, he urged me to go all in. And I went all in. The first act of magic I committed was I say it like a crime.
It is.
The first, like, yeah, right. The first, like, working spell that I did was like to get some drugs from a drug dealer that owed me money. And it worked.
Oh, wow.
You know, and that's really rare for the drug dealer to be like, oh yeah, I'm coming by to bring you something for free. You know, that's just not an experience that you have. Not in my situation, because I was usually owing other people, right? But see, that's one of the beautiful things about now is that, you know, I get to do things I didn't do before. Anyway, so yeah, so Odin drove me, and I had to live out my program all the way. I had to live out what I was going to do all the way until I had come to the realization that I need to do something different. But I wasn't going to stop until I was done. And so Odin kind of pushed me in that direction. And he even is seen in myths as driving two armies to fight each other. Purposefully. For some end. But to me, that meant that action, what was manifested as just like, we don't have time to dilly-dally. You're going all in now, and we're just going to do this. And so eventually he told me, now these things are no longer useful to you. And it took me a while to get what was really happening there. Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. It's like a disease of the will. I believe it's a spiritual malady that manifests itself in all forms. Both it shows up in your whole energy body, in your whole mind, in your whole heart, in your whole soul.
So yeah. Well, it's funny because actually that shaman that I worked with, that shaman person, was like, they're called spirits for a reason.
Yeah.
And it's actually sort of what you're saying is like, it's like a hijacking of your will. Like your will becomes very focused.
Oh, yeah. It's just laser focused.
Focused. It's just
really good at getting drugs, dude.
Drugs. Yeah. And it's like, if you could take that and just direct it anywhere else, it's like super potent.
Right. And so that's why I think that people who have had these experiences and who have recovered are such great, like, so if someone has no choice but to live their life on a spiritual basis, like I have no choice really. It's not really like that anymore. But there was a time when it was just like, you got to meditate or die, motherfucker. What are you going to do? Like, you got to pray every day or die. What are you going to do? And now I get to choose. But, you know, there was a time where like I had no choice but to do that. And so it almost put me through this rigorous discipline spiritually, to where now it's like, okay, I'm able to like give that away.
Yeah.
So I hesitate to call it a shaman or something, but it is that sort of function within our society.
Yeah, no, it's
an accidental initiation. If you believe in accidents, even, which I don't know if I
do. well, I mean, I think 100%, because I don't know, for me, always the people that went through those sort of situations, that were drug addicts or like alcoholics or whatever, they tend to be when they come out of it, they tend to be the most interesting people. And it's a Gnostic idea, because it's traveling through the darkest part of reality. I mean, it's like, I don't know if it's exactly the same, but it's probably in the ballpark of like going through war, in a sense. Like, you're going through this really dark thing and coming out the other side of it. And it's like in the Tao, the yin yang, right? What's the lightest part of the light? It's that dot in the dark, right? That's something you learn from painting, is like, if you want something to look really bright, you surround it with darkness. So it's often, and I think what you're saying is totally true. I think the shaman is going into the underworld, going into the depths, going into the darkness, because that's where the brightest light is. That's where it's condensed and solidified, because it's under the weight of all that darkness.
Yeah, the Philosopher's Stone is also found in filth.
Yeah, well, it's the lotus that springs up from the muck. Yeah. It's all the same right. Stuff. Yeah.
I had something real quick. Hold on. What was it? Oh, come on back. I don't know.
Was it about light and dark?
Yeah, it was about that stuff for sure. It's all good.
How did you get introduced to Odin? How did that happen?
Okay, so I have covered this on an episode that you should listen to.
Okay, well, just tell me the episode. I'll go listen to that.
It is the one with Michael Simon. It's called Ancestors, Jail Demons, and Flow.
Oh, I was going to get to that. Was the next one I was going to get to.
Yeah, you definitely need to check that one out.
Okay.
We don't have to. Basically, the way I'll give you a condensed version. It was, I overdosed.
Ooh, okay.
On something, probably fentanyl, because it was just like one hit of something. I took a hit of like heroin. Anyway, and so I fell out immediately. And when I came to, my wife at the time was like slapping me and pounding on my chest and was screaming, and I had become blue and stuff. I was out. And while I was out, I found myself in a dark forest, or maybe a twilight forest. And I was looking down over the ridge, and in the trees, I saw an old man walking, and he had a wide-brimmed hat, and he had one eye when he looked at me, and he looked at me, and I woke up. And I was screaming, Odin, Odin. And I was always into Norse mythology as a kid. I didn't really realize at that time or know that I had that lineage. It wasn't until later that I realized that that's actually an ancestral thing too, which makes sense. But yeah, so ever since that happened, and then it took me, because, like you said, singleness of mind, singleness of purpose, it took me years still for that to bear fruit. So I continued to do drugs. Finished the bag that I died from. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh yeah. There's two things it actually makes me think of. One was a dream that I had about my father. My father died when I was 18. And and I was very close with him. So it was this fundamentally tragic event. Really it gave me a whole other context of reality. Because when someone that important to you dies, there's a reality to that like affects everything. Like you get this real sense of like everything you begin, there's like, this will end at some point, you know? Actually, I don't know if I should pursue this or not. It feels tangential to what you're saying.
No, go ahead.
But I think it was because you were talking about, it was almost like a dream state where you were in a woods with this old man that's walking. And what's funny is that like I had one that was definitely an encounter with death. And it was in a dream that I had much later in life, a long time after my father died. And in it was me trying to protect my father from this old man who was a hunter. And he was this old man in like overall khakis and like a red and black checkered shirt with a hunting rifle. And I knew he was trying to kill my dad. And like the whole dream was me like trying to keep my dad away from this guy. And at some point I like pulled out this gun and turned around to shoot him. And it ended up being a Derringer. Like I had this tiny gun and shot and missed. And then like my father continued on, and eventually like I abandoned trying to protect him from this old man. And it kind of ventured off into this other like part, which also sort of referenced to like later parts of my life after my father died. But it's just sort of fascinating because I was like, that was definitely death as a entity. And it took this quality. It was funny that it took all this quality of this hunter.
That's really interesting because have you ever listened to the podcast Strange Familiars?
Oh, well, bits and pieces.
They talk about people have an apparition of a flannel wearing man that appears in the same, like in sleep paralysis situations. And
what? No way.
Yeah. Bedside apparitions. Yeah. That's really compelling.
What the fuck? Really? Okay.
Yeah. You can search flannel man and you'll find it if you search their stuff because they've done a lot on it.
Oh shit! I'll oh my god! Okay, I'll definitely have to look at that.
And then it also, of course, makes me think of, just because of the Odin stuff, the Wild Hunt.
Yeah.
Which
which is
it's a parade of the Fae and the dead that Odin leads across the sky.
And then he pulls unwary or unthinking people into it, and like you end up joining him forever. It was also funny what you were saying about like Odin would like set two armies against each other. Right. And it made me think about how there's this thing with like the angels and the sort of awful things they've visited upon the earth. And I had this really, and this is something there was a point where I, like, before I even got into this stuff, where I sort of logicked my way to like, I think it was almost like an animism where I had this thought that I was like, I've met some really intelligent people and I feel like I'm fairly smart, but there's a certain point where like, I don't understand them. Right. Yeah. I don't understand them. And then the way they act is so strange. And I'm like, but on the scale of intelligence, we're not that far apart, me and this guy, or me and this woman, whatever, me and this person. So what if you had something that was 10 times or 100 times more intelligent than that? And I started to extrapolate that. And I was like, would you even know that you were encountering something that was hyper intelligent? Because it would be acting in such a way that you would not even understand what it was doing. And like, I was like, it'd basically be the weather. Like the weather could have an intention and be wanting to do something, and you're just too stupid to understand what it is. And so that kind of, that's just explain this point about like the angels, and it's like if you were that far, so many dimensions, you're viewing things from so many dimensions above, and say you can see the breadth of time and you can see where things are going. What is your morality like at that point? What do your decisions look like? What things would seem horrible to an ant that is totally fine to a scientist observing that ant? And yeah, I don't know. I guess that's
that brings us back to Lovecraft.
Yeah, and I guess it's also a very complicated way of saying like, what's the old Christian thing? You do not know God's will or something, or what is the thing? Right, like, I forget what it is.
His will is often described as unknowable, incomprehensible.
Yes. Who are we to comprehend?
Works in mysterious ways.
That's the one I'm trying to think of. But yes, that's also very Lovecraftian. Like,
just these totally alien, amoral. I mean, they're beyond any concept of it. We are the ants. We are the ants that David Lynch freezes in I actually had a dream once that David Lynch was traveling through realities, gathering the pieces of this machine from other David Lynches. So, like, imagine like Jet Li's the one, but with David Lynch, kind of, and he doesn't kill him; he gets something from him. But man, did I peek into behind the curtain on that one? I don't know.
I think what you just said is just what's actually happening. I think that's what Lynch is doing, is gathering all the bits of Hyper Lynch. He's putting Hyper Lynch together.
Yes, I love the idea of
Hyper Lynch.
Yes. Like some Talos style steampunk Lynch, like a giant god robot.
I mean, it's funny. This feels like something Alan Moore would write, because his actually, I don't know if you read Providence. Did you read Providence?
I need to. I was just listening to some. I think I was just listening to the episode of Rune Soup about it.
It's one of my favorite things he's done. It's really amazing. And it really takes Lovecraft into these really like interesting places. But it's funny because one of the things that happens is that like his protagonists meet on the fourth dimension, and they're like these like accordion people, right? Because they're it's them as the the hyper them, the thing through time. So it totally feels like that would be the Alan Moore Lovecraft story. It would have Hyper Lynch in it, and which is just this like worm tunneling through reality.
Have you read The Voice from the Fire?
No, I've always wanted to.
I read the first like chapter of it in jail, and it's wild. It's one of those things. So the first chapter of it is from the point of view of like a mentally challenged person in like ancient England. I don't know, like before Romans. I'm not sure exactly when, but the descriptions that he uses and the way of thinking that he brings through this person, through this character, it's like the way he describes things, it's just you've never heard him described this way before. It's really cool. I didn't get to read the whole book, thankfully, because I got out when I was reading it. So I can't be mad about it. I'll find it again. But just the way that, so it's like he's not only taking the point of view of someone that's in a completely different time, but someone that doesn't see or maybe perceive the world in the same way that the rest of us do. So it's like just layers and layers of, it's beautiful poetry though, but it's abstract and it's sometimes brutally direct, and it's hard to describe actually. And it's rare to find something like that in writing, right? Because it's like, oh, this is English, but this is like, this character is alive right here, and I don't understand them. And I have to kind of like learn them, like learning a language or something.
Which it literally alters your your perception and your it's fascinating. There, I just he's got this like writer's course on the BBC. I haven't finished it yet, but I'm about halfway through. And there's a point in there where he talks about writing from a perspective of it's an angel, but it's literally this angel that's on top of this. It's a stone angel on top of a building somewhere I forget where he lives. I forget the town in England, because the story's set there. It's the novel that's what is the giant tome that came after? It has like one word name. I can't remember the name of it. But it's a part in that book, and he's writing it from a multidimensional entity that can see like into and out of and around time. And he talked about like while he was writing this, he had to think like this, right? And he talked about how like it sort of fucked him up for like a month afterwards. Like he couldn't really communicate with people because he had warped his way of thinking so much.
That's so cool. It's like that experiment where they wear the glasses that are upside down, and then eventually they're
the brain flips it.
Yeah.
Yes.
But like that with just your like total dimensionality.
Have you ever done the thing where you figure out the blind spot in your eye?
No.
Actually, there's two cool things you can do with your eye. I forget exactly how to do this, but there's a way to, like, if you hold your hand out with like the top tip of your thumb and you close one eye, and you sort of adjust it. There's a point where the tip of your thumb will disappear. And that's literally the place in the back of your eye where the optic nerve is. And it's, and so literally what's happening second to second, well, millisecond to millisecond, is your brain is filling in that gap. It's like taking all the information around it, like
Dino DNA.
Yeah, it's like pacing over it. But here's the other weird one about your eye: is your eye actually contains basically a museum of the entire history of optic evolution. And because basically how the eye has evolved is it's the most primitive thing, and the next step evolves and it kind of pushes the more primitive thing out, and then out and out and out. So basically, if you take your hand and you're waving it and you put it behind your head and you start to move it, there's a certain point where you can see the motion. And when you're seeing the motion, that's what earliest vision was like, all motion. And there's a certain point, if you slowly go it, you can start to see kind of a gray shape. And eventually the form will start to come into place. And then at the very end, you'll get color, which is like right in front of your eyes, your vision. So basically your eye contains the entire history of its development within itself.
That's really cool. It also has me thinking about the ancestors and how it's not just a museum, but it's like it was passed down to you from those earlier forms. I mean, those are your ancestors
right there. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a guy that does, oh God, what is his name? Shit, I can't remember his name. I'll have to look him up. He's a guy that's all about like, he teaches like these like movement classes, like as his whole thing. And so he teaches it from like an ancestral perspective, because your entire skeletal system contains like our body's built out of all its past forms. Like our spine is basically the same as what a fish would have. And then you add the rib cage and the pelvis, and that's like being a lizard. And then, and all the different components are just different steps in the evolution. And in fact, what's also fascinating is basically like our embryonic development is the same as like the evolutionary process. You go from a single cell organism all the way to a complex mammal, but you do all these like amphibious stages and reptilian stages in between the single cell all the way to the full baby. Yeah, and so
that's some hermeticism right there. Some as above, so below, right?
Below. Yeah, so basically you're contained. You contain all these like past elements of yourself, and I mean even the like basically the organs and the flesh and everything. That's almost like being a single cell organism, where you're just literally almost like a sack of liquid. In fact, there was a lady that was her whole thing. Is she talked about how we were basically water walking on land.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, and it really, if you really think about it, it's like it's influenced my martial arts training too, because there's this thing, like I train a Chinese internal martial art, which is that's a whole discussion about what that even means, but it's very weird. And it's a lot of like, you invert a lot of your thinking. And one of the big ones is like the way we typically think about, say our bodies and like the skeleton, like how it's built. We think of a skeleton, and then we think of that as the foundation. And then you add components and hang them off of it, like building a building. Like the skeleton's a scaffolding, and you just hang this stuff all the time. But really, how we work is it's like a soft, organic liquid sack with this rigid thing inside of it, and the rigid thing is there for the soft thing to pull against and give it form. But it's not that it hangs off the structure. It's more like the structure is suspended inside the soft liquid thing. And like when you really start to play with that, it gets really strange.
Yeah, I love stuff like that. I love that whole new way of looking at something. I recently I've been getting like kind of ancestors talking to me a little bit while I'm running. You know, when you get that like good runner's high.
I've been a fat kid most of my life, so no.
Well, it's just like anything else, right? So I haven't been big into it before either, but I'm starting to get into it. And there's a euphoria that comes just like with anything. And I get kind of tranced out, but since it's an exercise of the body, I've been calling in my ancestors to do healing and to just enjoy it with me. And so I'll just kind of get those transmissions sometimes when I'm running, or when I call it in, it's usually going to happen, you know?
That would make sense, because I would imagine it's a form of trance state.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is. It is that. And so I'll call them in and I'll say, as the blood is flowing through my veins, and that's leading to me. It's cool that you say that, because one of the things that came through was the heart is a drum. So there's the way that mainstream science sees it now, or materialism, or whatever you want to call it, is they call it a pump.
Yeah.
But no, they wanted me to know that the heart is a drum. And that drum beat has carried on all the way back, and you're carrying it on still.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, that's awesome. There's an anatomist that kind of clued me in on this, which is also really cool, which you might like, which is, okay, so the way we think of anatomy is it's very materialistic and Western, you breaking things down. But the reality is that like, we've just assigned words to different parts. Right. So if you really think about it, so yeah, the heart is at the center of this stuff, and it's the center of the circulatory system. But what is the difference between those two things?
Right.
There isn't one. It's a continuity. And when you think about that and realize that, and then you look at what the heart and its connection to all of those, the blood, the arteries, the veins, the capillaries, it goes out through your entire body. So your entire body is a heart.
Yeah.
And It is not this single separate thing that is contained within yourself. It is literally the entirety of you.
That's something so archonic to me about materialism and about the modern way of viewing the body, is that it just vivisects everything. Like, it's just obsessed with vivisecting everything,
Breaking it down to the yes.
Right, while it's alive, and then saying, "Oh, how does that work?" It's just like trying to figure out how I don't know. It's a really backwards way of trying to get at something that's alive by pulling it into pieces and killing it, basically.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole new batch of anatomical studies that is all about fascia, and that's only happened in the last, like, I think 10 to 20 years, maybe. And it's all because when they would dissect human bodies, they were like, we don't know what this stuff is, and they would just throw it away. So they didn't think it did anything.
Right. It was just, that's just like the insulation in your car or something.
Or nothing. Yeah, exactly. It's like they have no concept. It's the same thing where, like, there's like junk DNA, and it's like, I don't know about that.
Yeah, doubt
it. I'm pretty sure that probably has a purpose.
That stuff.
Yeah. What spurred you to get into running? Was it something you did before, or is it like a totally new thing?
No, it's pretty. I mean, I've been off and on, but most of the time of my life has been spent not running. You know, a great deal. Just, I don't know. Just been working out lately, and I've been pretty into that. And I ritualize it quite a bit. I do a lot of like energy work in between sets, and a lot of visualization while I'm lifting the weights of the light going to the spots that may be sore or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to see if it gives me better results.
Well, you know, it's funny. All the bodybuilders will talk about the mind muscle connection.
That's magic.
Yeah.
It's magic.
Actually, an old philosophy friend of mine, we were like literally like, bodybuilding is the most fundamental fucking form of magic, because it's literally like, yeah, you put your will to something and you see it transform.
Change in accordance with will.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's the most direct application.
And there have been studies done that show that people get better results when they visualize muscles growing.
Really?
Muscle growth.
That makes sense. 14%. That makes sense.
And the
14%, it's that high? Damn.
Yeah, 14% difference.
Wow. I got to get back into doing kettlebells. I completely neglected.
Oh yeah, I've never done those.
I used to love them. I was at a point where I was doing 272 pounds, pressing them overhead and squatting them and everything. Nice. But then I tweaked my back and it all fell apart.
That can happen.
No, I was going to say that, like, I've always hated running, but I am very curious about it now.
Yeah, it's different now. It used to be the whole time it was like, just get me the fuck out of here.
Yeah.
Like, I hate this. But I don't know. Well, I mean, I've been doing a lot more breath work, and I do a lot of Reiki visualization, and I would say even ancestor work too. Like, all that stuff has caused me to take a lot more importance for my body.
Yeah.
You know? And like, if I'm going to work in one aspect of my life, I'm going to try to work in all of them. Positive changes just keep happening. The more I do magic, the more I meditate, the more I do breath work, the more I do energy work. It just seems to have a totally cumulative positive effect on my life.
Yeah. I sort of, I mean, the martial art I studied is fairly interwoven with esoteric concepts, although they're not as forward about them. But it is really the thing I realized, like, at this point in my life, was like, I don't think I was really living in my body. I was sort of squished up into my head, and then there was this fuzzy thing that existed below my neck, that was there that my head was attached to.
Yeah.
And this process has really made me like, and this was sort of another thing that sort of both emerged out of like the Taoist martial arts stuff, but also like having done the angel walk, which I just finished not a couple of weeks ago.
Oh yeah, that could be a whole episode too, I bet.
Yeah, I don't, should we even, I guess I should give a little preface to what that is. So there was because I'm a Rinsu member, there was a class structure where one of the projects was to contact the 72 angels of I think they're called the Shemshafaroth. I can't remember the actual name.
The Shemhamfresh?
That's it. Yes. Yeah. I'm always just going to toss them to you whenever I need to.
That's cool. Yeah.
You
set them up, I'll knock them down.
That's perfect. And they're basically, it's almost like there's one for every 5 degrees of the rotation of the Earth. So you basically over a full year, you cover the entire sky, I guess, more or less. And so one of the things I got out of that, and it was combined with the Taoist practice, because there's this thing in Taoist alchemy where they talk about you create the golden embryo, which is like this literal golden embryo that like forms in your belly at a certain point. Like, I don't know what the hell that actually is, and like because almost all that stuff is sort of a metaphor. But the thing it did make me realize is that we never stop being born. Yes, we're born from our mothers, but every day is us more, like, if we do it right, is us more fully incarnating into this reality. And we keep doing that until the very day of our death. And part of the process is, and that's something that you realize when you really start to like connect with your body, is that most of us don't fully incarnate here. We're not fully born into this reality. Maybe that's mostly just like an error of Western materialist process, but it's something that I've come to think is definitely true. Is that part of what we're doing in the magic and the occult is being more and more and further born into this reality. And you do that through the body. And I think if we want to talk about archonic things, that's another one, is divorcing us from that physical presence of our own bodies.
It's a decapitation.
Yes.
But it's in almost a worse way, because it's divorcing you from that. And then there's all these sort of forced separations, or they seem to be forced. I don't know how it could all happen on accident, where you're disconnected from your body. Like, I'm disconnected from my body. I'm disconnected from the reality of the dead and of my ancestors. I'm disconnected from spirit itself. Can that just be like, whoops? Or is there something going on that's a concerted effort against those things? To me, It just seems like there has to be something. And even if it's... Go ahead.
Well, I mean, and then that gets back to that idea of like, if you're a hyper entity, what is your morality? And what if, like, it's like the pine cones will not produce seed unless there's a fire.
Yeah. And also it brings back to what you said about the Black Iron Prison. It can become the palm tree garden.
Yes.
It's for me to
turn it into that.
Yes. Yeah.
To shuck off the prison. Yeah.
Because that's really what jail was like, is it's whatever you make it. It was like the weirdest thing was it's just a microcosm of, to me, it's been a microcosm of my experience of living in this society, was jail. It's whatever you make it. It can be a prison, or it can be a monastery. or it can just be another place from which you trudge into this vast, uncollapsible world of spirit. Like it doesn't, I have a connection to that. Yeah, you can put me in a box, but it ain't going to do anything. You know what I mean? It's only
because even in that box is infinity.
Yeah, it's right here.
Yeah.
And every little tiny piece of reality is just the infinite wholeness of all of it. I mean, in that sense, it is a hologram, right?
Yeah, the fractalization. Yes.
Yes.
One of the journeys I was on when I was doing the like plant medicine things, I forget what the hell the thing is they gave me. It was some crazy African root. They had shit I had never heard of. And the way they worked is that you would talk to the facilitator, who was the shaman. They called him a facilitator though. And you talk about what you want. And then depending on how long you were with them, they knew what your process was. And they would just pick a pill and give it to you. And the pills had like letter names, or they were called, they would be called like S, D, K, whatever. And then after the fact, they might tell you what was contained in the pill. And the whole thing, it's like, it's weird, but then you realize the thing is that all it's really trying to do is make you have the experience and not think and go into it with preconceptions. That was the whole thinking behind it. So the stuff I did, I don't even know what the fuck it was. Like via conga root or something. I've saw it on Aowen once, and I've never been able to find it again. But part of it was like every step I took, I felt myself break into this spiraling fractal pattern. Like and every moment and every second was another one of those. And it was this thing that was like, oh yeah, it's exactly what you're saying. Every moment is this infinite potential, one to the next, to the next, to the next. And so it really opened up this idea, like the possibility of like, you really could jump into anything. And like, I think that's part of what magic is like navigating that fractalization and like calling what it is you want out of that towards you.
You said pure potentiality at one point, I think, earlier in the conversation.
Yeah.
The potentiality.
Yeah. The idea of 0 points. Yeah. That every moment contains the possibility, like infinite possibility, infinite power. I mean, easier said than done, but
right. Yeah, it's a process that I more often call just remembering who I am.
Yeah. And it's funny, you have to, that's like, you always have to remind yourself.
Yeah. And sometimes it's harder than others,
Yeah.
My good days and my bad days.
I've had a lot of bad days in the last couple of years, I got to tell you.
Yeah, it's been tough.
Yeah, this has not been easy. Although what's crazy is that I think I probably have done more magic in these last 2 years than I ever have in my entire life.
Yeah, and I've done more praying too.
Same, yeah.
And I've done more, everything. I mean, I really do see, like, no matter what archonic forces or what darkness wells up, I really do think that there's like an equal and opposite reaction to put it in such a mechanistic sense. But for every upwelling of darkness and pain and death and despair, there's an upwelling of prayer and magic and stand against that.
Yeah.
It's like we aren't left alone.
Yeah. No matter how hard it seems. Yes.
Right.
And it's funny because what I'm realizing is that also, like, much like you were talking about jail, and it's really what you make out of it. Given that these last 2 years have been so shuttered and imprisoning for just about everybody, it really was like, in some senses, like a monastic retreat.
Yes.
Which is about the best spin I can put on it. I mean, it was still
Right.
shitty.
Well, what am I going to do with it? What am I going to do with it, though? Like, I don't have the choice of going through the experience. The only thing I do have the choice of is what I'm going to do with it, right?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And yeah. And actually, that we touched on earlier, that first angel summoning that we're talking about, was like, if I hadn't jumped in on that group when they were summoning the Archangel Michael, I don't know that I would be talking to you right now.
Right. And there's a lot. I can think of a lot of things like that in my life. Really looking back, this podcast exists because my car got rear-ended and totaled, and my car was my job. So I used the insurance money that I got from that to get this van and this podcast gear. And it's like a pool ball hitting me in a totally different direction.
Closer to what you want to be doing anyway.
But yeah, exactly. But I used to be blown around by that chaos, but this engaging with this stuff gives me a way to hitch a ride on the chaos instead of being blown hither and thither.
Well, it's funny. I think there's also a benefit of that happens with age, where you realize that sometimes those really terrible things are for the better.
Yeah.
Or they often will lead to there's even, no matter what is dark, there's like, I'll go back to this, like, even though I lost my father at a very young age, and it was incredibly painful. The flip side of that is, in which actually I'm kind of okay saying this now, there is a freedom to that, because I don't have to meet his expectation. I'm not burdened by that anymore. Like the possible restrictions that my father possibly could have put on me are no longer there. So that is it's not great. I'd still rather have my father, but that is a component of that.
There are things that the dead can do for us that the living cannot.
That's true. That's true as well. Yes.
That's just one way of looking at it, right? And yeah. So you said it comes with age. It comes with perspective. Yeah, just a different angle at looking at it. Thank you for sharing that. That's cool.
No problem. Yeah. I try to just actually, and this is, I don't, they say this is like a Cancerian trait of like not enjoying bullshit talk and wanting to get deep. And I think I definitely, that's my thing. It's like, I can't just talk about the weather. Like I
can't either. It always has to it gets cosmic real fast.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
That's that Lovecraftian thing. And I gotta go to the very edges.
The pleroma.
Love it. Yeah, but if you think about it, the pleroma is just even kind of a Giger style, like everything is just one, all swirling together. It's like the last scene of Society where everyone's just like asses and arms and stuff.
Dude, I love that you brought up the movie Society.
Dude, I think about it in a Gnostic lens all the time. Like trying to get back to the oneness of source is like, okay.
Oh, that reminds me. That's another one that's if we expand out of the top 3 horror monster movies and we get a little From Beyond.
I was going to ask you about From Beyond earlier, dude. From Beyond is the thing I forgot earlier. Remember when I didn't have it come back?
Yes.
I was going to ask you, have you seen From Beyond? I love that movie.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites.
And we rented it as kids, and like, it's funny because I was actually kind of pissed because I was the kid that was like, I was mad because it wasn't a lot like the story.
Uh-huh.
And so I didn't get to enjoy it, but I rewatched it again pretty recently. And damn, if it's not one of my favorite movies.
It's fucking amazing.
It's so good. the guy in that just like is continually having these sort of apotheoses, but is also becoming like just completely degenerating, like he's falling apart and has all these weird like eye stalks coming out of his forehead, and like but he continues to know more every time he knows more, but he just becomes a monster by the end. Love that.
And then literally,
he's a helpful monster, you know.
He protects the woman, which is crazy because at the end of it, she's literally fucking nuts. Like,
oh yeah, everyone is by the end of it. It's great. It's just that great trope of like there's the scientist that originally builds the machine. I've always loved this trope. It's, you know, the Frankenstein, Faust, whatever. But he's, you know, it's like, oh my God, turn off the machine. Turn off the machine. Something's gone horribly wrong. And he just goes, no, I need to see more. You know, like that. That's a mood, right?
There was a thing that because in college I introduced my friends to that movie. I got them all together and I made them watch it because it used to pop up on like HBO or something. It and Reanimator, that's another fucking great one.
It's the same actor too.
Jeffrey Combs.
Yeah,
who's like, I love him.
He's really good.
It's funny because that sort of movie doesn't really exist anymore.
That sort of actor almost doesn't even exist anymore.
There's those very specific character actors, like yes.
Like I like a weird guy. Where are the weird people? Everyone has to be beautiful.
There is like a
and they
like
are
they
all
put,
beautiful.
Beautiful. Did they
beautiful?
Did they put something in the water? Why are these people? And that's the thing. As someone who studies art and has drawn people forever, I'm like, you know, there's a certain level of pretty where it's just boring.
Yes.
And that's what everyone is now.
The world without sin.
And like no one is like unique. One of the great, like, have you ever seen?
Yeah, like where's Harry? Like where are the Harry Dean Stantons?
Yeah, or even like someone like fucking like Charles Bronson.
Right.
Who would look like that now?
Right.
Once Upon a Time in the West. I don't know if you've ever seen that.
I love that movie.
Yeah, the very beginning is like all these close-ups of these really like specific people.
Yeah, and they're just like weathered and shit.
And it's funny, like studying figurative art and like drawing people. There's a thing that and I from what I understand, it used to be more commonly taught. Like they would teach like drawing classes, like portrait classes and stuff to everybody. And that could be a whole subject in itself. The things that are revealed through that process, because it is this very meditative. The study of like art and light gets real deep and real weird. But there is a thing that happens when you draw and paint people who we're just normal people who are not like done up. They're not. You start to it really does. You start to realize the beauty of everybody. If you because you really spend enough time like looking at the details and like how little things echo across their faces and oftentimes it's like, if I had to draw like one of these, like, I don't know, CW TV people, it's just boring. But if you give me like some like old janitor or something, it's like done manual labor for like 50 years, like, and their face has something.
Yeah,
there's something,
some grit.
Yeah, there's like a deep beauty to that. That's like, and I mean beauty. Not it's not like rugged or handsome. I mean, it's beautiful. There's something beautiful about that is like that is sort of missed when you average it out to this one single weird chiseled standard.
It's like probably just decided by an algorithm.
Yeah, probably at this point.
Like, get that good AI face we saw. Have you seen that? That's the site. This face does not exist.
Oh yeah, I've looked at that.
It's an interesting thing to think because they say you can't. I not who knows, right? But like,
Hmm.
have you ever heard that you can't dream a face that you haven't seen?
No, I haven't heard that. That's interesting.
Yeah, I've heard that before. So I wonder what's happening when you come up with faces that haven't existed before.
I wonder about that because I've made up faces and heads and stuff, and like I'm like, I don't know how true that is. I
I don't
wonder.
think it's true. That sounds like a pretty mechanistic view of it. I would
I
think.
mean,
Like to some
there's a
extent, everything is made of components of
components of everything
everything else.
else.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, that said, I remember. Did you ever listen to Radio Lab?
yeah.
They had like the first season or so of that was fantastic, and then that just sort of drifted off into like I don't know what now.
I actually
Um,
may have even heard that from Radio Lab. For
I
all I
wouldn't
know,
be I wouldn't be surprised.
it sounds like a
Just
Radio Lab
your
thing,
lab
doesn't
thing.
it?
Yeah, well, I remember they had an episode about dreams, and they were like, dreams are just your brain running scenarios to get better, and I'm like, no, they're not.
Yeah, it's the worst.
I was like, as soon as I heard that, I'm like, you guys are full of shit. You don't know what the fuck you're talking
Yeah, yeah.
about.
I couldn't listen to it anymore. It's one of those ones I loved when I was like, it's like, okay, so I guess you got to try to put some heart into it somehow, but it's just not going in the right direction, right? Like the intentions are there, maybe, but it's just like the most boring explanation is the truest. Like Occam's dumb razor, where like in reality, to like in my experience, the most uninteresting question is by that virtue not right,
Hmm.
boring, and therefore wrong. You know, that's a maxim of the Elder Scrolls lore. Do you ever play those video games?
I've never played them now.
So they have a really cool open source lore. It kind of took place over a lot of role playing, both in person and um, on chat rooms and stuff and message boards.
So the gaming community like kind of co-created the world.
The developers co-created the world with the community, kind of.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay. Oh, so that sort of explains why it's so popular.
yeah. And well, it's
Okay.
also it's one of those things. It's like it's getting worse as it moves farther away from that. Where there's like
Mm.
once you have a lore master, like it starts to be like fuck it, I don't care anymore. But so this was like it was sort of like a chaos magic-y kind of deal, and they had this idea where it's like whatever we come up with, like the boring one, if it's boring, it's wrong.
Hmm.
They would just go with the most interesting version of things, and all these it was kind of generated through writing these in universe books and fragments that were from unreliable narrators in this world. It's just a really cool way to build a world, in my opinion.
Well, it actually sounds. What's funny is that in a certain sense, that always happens. It's just that how much say does the community that are the fans have in
Yeah.
it? Because I guarantee you, um, Star Wars wasn't popular. I don't. I think it's a thing that should be dragged out and shot at this point. I think it needs to go, and so something else can take its place. But
Yeah.
it was popular because the world felt real enough that I think other people could feel like they could inhabit it.
Yeah.
And so it's the same with Lord of the Rings. Like the world is vivid enough that people feel like they can be there and they can participate in it. Even if they're not helping write it, there's a part of it that exists in them, so they write it for themselves.
And when you start to lose that, it's no longer quite so habitable.
I don't know. Yeah.
Which is interesting too, considering what you were saying earlier about how a lot of people don't fully inhabit
Their bodies.
the world that we're in, right? It's like we've jumped the shark as a reality. That this timeline has jumped the shark. No, I don't know. That may be a tenuous connection at best, but I thought I'd try to make it.
What do you think was the shark jumping moment?
Oh Lord, I don't know if there you can. Is that a cop out?
No.
What do you think?
I don't know. It's probably something as stupid as when they canceled Seinfeld or some shit.
Yeah. I don't know. Things just keep getting weirder and weirder. It's almost like it just continues to unfold. It's a continuously unfolding shark jumping.
Yeah,
but maybe we need to. You know what I mean? Maybe that's the shark we need to jump over.
I definitely think that whatever has been going on for the last 100, 200, 300 years is definitely starting to collapse and grind to a halt. That's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think whatever comes next, we have to build together. And we don't I don't think that we can even know what it is. And anyone that tells me what it is immediately suspect to me. Anyone that tells me what this new world is supposed to look like, it's something that we have to all create together.
Yeah. And well, I mean, if you knew what it was, it would the joys and the discovery of it and the creation of that,
right. Which is why when the lore gets draconian, it gets boring. When you can't play around in the world anymore, just to leap back over to that.
It's funny. And it's only recently, like I've had this weird fascination with like revolutionary and earlier era Americas, because it was basically the whole country was a bunch of fucking criminals, more or less.
Right.
that
I'm in a debtor's prison, Colin.
Yeah. And they basically just said, hey, fuck you, King. We're gonna make our own thing. And
I'm really interested in the pirates for the same reason.
Yeah. Yeah, they always fascinate. There's an interesting book that's all about like these anarchist pirate utopias, which were cities along the like Barbary Coast, I think.
Yeah, oh really?
Yeah, I think it was the Barbary. Or am I thinking of that right?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That's cool though. It wasn't where I expected them to be.
The Barbary Coast is like around. Where am I? Where am I thinking? It's sort of like it's sort of around the area of like where Morocco and stuff is.
Okay, yeah, I think you're right. I think no, that's not where I expected. That's cool. Continue.
Yeah. Okay. So, and they created these like little city states. It was all run on piracy, and they formed their own governments and all this other crazy shit.
Because they did it in the Caribbean too.
Yeah, actually, have you? What the hell is the name? Black Sails. Have you ever watched that?
Yeah, that's really good.
I love that. That show is amazing.
Yeah, I like it a lot. I thought that was a sleeper hit. Like I didn't hear about it a lot, but I was like, okay, I'll check it out. And pirates got lame to me for a while, but when I started to learn about what it was really going on there, it's a lot cooler. It's a lot like, going up against the Empire.
Oh, it's totally that. And it's totally this thing where like your ship is it's your country.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah.
It does have that. There's some sci-fi that has that feel to it too, right? Like the ship being the crew, its own character.
Yeah, its own world to itself and everything.
Yeah.
And I think it seems like that's probably where things are heading. Like, there's still going to be maybe the centralized authority, but I think it's going to increasingly like it's going to. I don't know. I personally feel it's going to be so much more about like what is your personal community and like who's directly around you and like I don't know. It feels like that's where it's heading.
I hope so.
Yeah, I'm actually kind of hopeful for that too.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. Getting there might be weird.
I mean, you have your own little pirate ship, you have your van.
Yeah, that's what the dream is, right? So this van is cool because you can actually work on the engine from the front seat. The engine is
Oh,
in the center console. Like you can take off the doghouse and it's in there. So I've driven down the road with my engine exposed
oh my God,
before.
really?
Yeah.
Holy, that's
It's
some
cool
Mad
too because
Max
it's
shit. That's
yeah,
awesome.
yeah, man. Exactly. It was what it made me think of as Mad Max. I'm a huge Mad Max fan.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Fury Road, 100,000%.
Dude, it's so good. And he does that
It's
too, where he is really good with language to where he can make a slang culture where the slang are so believable and then he feeds in like pop culture into it too. It's so beautiful.
that movie is like incredible. And the fact that it was one of those guys revisiting like this thing they made when they were younger, which is mostly failed. But he came back at it and it was incredible.
But I used to watch Road Warrior every night to put myself to sleep. That was like my lullaby, dude. I would watch that movie every night. I would eat cans of like beefaroni and ravioli and pretend to be Mad Max. So sometimes I wonder if we like bring ourselves into these timelines
because we got upset. I don't know. It's a good question. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, how close is your van to the Interceptor?
Oh, it's not close to the Interceptor. It doesn't really sprint up a hill now. She goes easy, you know what I mean? But she's a cruiser.
How old of a van is it?
It's the same year as me, 1986.
Okay.
And it's got a slant six engine in it, which is virtually immortal. Like you'll have to rebuild it at some point, but it'll keep going.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. It's very simple. I don't know anything about cars and I can easily learn what's going on in it. It's got a carburetor. And so you can just kind of like stick your hand in it while it's running and like figure out what's going on. It's crazy.
Whoa, really?
Yeah. There's like a little flap door and it's much simpler than an electronic fuel injection with a computer and all this stuff, and it's taking readings and it's
I had a friend in college who was he worked as an auto mechanic for a while, and he was talking about how there was a change that happened. I don't know what year it was, but he talked about how they used to design the cars with the idea of like the person who bought it would do maintenance on them.
Right. Like I would understand what's going on
in there. Yeah. And he was like really old cars. It's like you could open a hood and you could practically stand in it inside the engine compartment with the engine. It was like, that was how much space was in there. And he said that at a certain point, it was like, what would happen is that they would there was like this hierarchy where it was like someone would design the body and then the chassis, and then the engine person would come in next. And then the engine person would take up as much space as possible. And then the AC person would come in and then have to design so they fit all their shit around where the engine was. And it became about these people just like cramming shit like into and on top of everything.
And then you've got like the corporate that are just like trying to save as much money as possible. And so they're like, no, do this, or they're going on fads or something, like whatever they want, like the studio interfering with a movie, right?
Yeah.
And so there's all this. The left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing, probably, and designed by committee, like sometimes works.
Sometimes. Yeah, someone was telling me actually that's really interesting that like design trends start with the automotive industry because they take so long to tool up their manufacturing. Like it takes so many years to change the assembly lines that when a trend starts there, it will eventually work its way out to the larger culture. But I don't know how this worked exactly. This came from this came from somebody who is like, because they have these like companies that are like trend analysis companies. I don't know what they're like now. That must be insane.
Yeah, I can't imagine. It just does seem that seems occult to me.
Oh yes, yeah, for sure.
What I'm doing just seems like normal shit that humans do.
Whereas these people are trying to steer and manufacture culture. Literally, is
Yeah.
literally what they're trying to do. Yeah,
Well, think about advertising is. I mean, that's just a psyop.
that's the idea. What's funny is that like I think it used to be more of one.
Yeah.
I because I've worked in ad agencies and most of those people don't know what the fuck they're doing whatsoever.
Oh yeah. So you're saying they've become less good at the psyop?
Well, they've become more about trying to jockey and win awards.
Oh yeah, really?
And like I think it used to have because there's another thing where it's like you know how like everything is just sort of atomized into like smaller and smaller chunks and like things are like um everything is like we hire out one company to do one thing and then that company hires out three other companies to do the same do parts of the one thing so it's this like really so if there's like a really I think it probably still happens at the very large at the top of the stream but downstream I don't think it's happening as much.
Yeah,
I think
makes sense. That makes sense.
I think most people are just trying to kind of do cool shit.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of like how that's kind of how a lot of things work, right? You know, so that the people that are always doing it can believe that they're doing something good and that they can have some kind of this is a really cynical view by the way, but they can have like plausible
advertising is
deniability,
cynical.
right?
Yeah.
So it's like kind of like dude, why does it remind me of what the explanation that's always given for secret societies? It's like, oh well, the individual cells don't necessarily know what the top echelons are doing, but it really is kind of like that.
Yeah.
Like some of them are more involved than others, maybe, and there are players that move throughout. That's what I'm saying. It's like the corporate world is just a cult to me. I don't know.
Well, and I think the thing is that most people don't want to think that that's how it works.
Yeah, I think you're right.
When if you stare at it for longer than 10 seconds, it's like, oh, that's totally what's happening.
Yeah.
And I'm listening. I'm listening to this podcast it's Louis C.K. and what's the guy's name? Shane Gillis. And they're going through all of the American presidents. They're just talking about all the American presidents. And it's really funny because you like Louis C.K. will sort of like he'll drift towards that stuff for a second, and he's like, and then he'll like recoil from it and be like, but I don't really know if that's how it, I don't know that that's actually how it works. I don't know what I'm talking about, like whatever. But you can see that it's more like he's resisting facing the fact that there's some sort of conspiratorial nefarious thing going on.
Yeah. I'll have to check that out.
It's really good. It's really, really good.
Yeah, I think a lot of folks do that as well. And it is probably just, I think it's because most people don't think like that. Most people aren't psychopaths. And so like, I want to believe that the people have everyone's best interests. The people at the highest, levels have everyone's best interests at heart. But if you know anything about corporations, you know that just isn't true.
Well, and I think there's a thing that happens where because so there's the concept of the egregore, right? You know that one.
Yeah.
And there's also the like it's kind of similar to the idea of the genius loci or something. It's in an animist context, it totally makes sense. Is that there's a certain point where the corporation exists as an entity unto itself, and it literally is using the people as cells to its body.
Yeah.
And there might be an aspect of this where like they don't even understand why they're doing the thing, but they're just caught up in the body of it.
I think we're kind of like that. I mean, I think we are kind of just amalgam of spirits.
Yes, I mean, I
You
think
know, the Egyptians thought there's seven. I think there maybe more. You know.
it was probably like hundreds.
Oh yeah, a whole universe.
The future grimoire transmitting your asshole spirits into.
I like it. That's 3 hours.
Wait, what?
We almost hit 3 hours.
Wait, did we really?
Almost.
Wait,
Yeah.
did you run out of tape or something?
No, I was just gonna let you know.
Oh, okay.
No.
No, because the video froze for a second. I was like, oh shit,
Oh.
what happened?
Yep. We're running out. I got to change the spool.
I have to change the internet. Give me a second.
Yeah. Got to get more internets.
Switch them out.
Well, hell yeah, man.
Are you? Do you feel like we should bottle it up for right now?
Yeah, I'm just probably losing steam is all.
No, that's fair. By the way, is that like a little orgone generator thing in front
I
of
don't
you?
know, man. I bought this at an estate sale, and it's an obelisk made of some sort of stone, but I can't tell what kind of stone it is. It has little fossil-looking things in it, perhaps, or
Oh, so it's solid. It's the solid thing.
yeah, it's made out of some sort of stone.
Oh, okay. I'd have to take a closer look. I could maybe help you figure that thing out.
Here, I'm going to show it to you then, because I want to know. It just called out to me, and I could feel its power when I held it.
Oh, it's probably. Oh, oh, wow. So it's like black and gray. You know, what it sort of looks like. It's probably it's likely a type of jasper, would be my guess. But
I was hoping so.
it's probably likely to have a jasper. But there's also it doesn't quite look like this. But you should look up the stone called merlinite.
Oh, I already love the name of it. It's Merlin.
Merlin, yeah, based
oh my
on
god,
Merlin.
he's the best.
Yeah, so it's called merlinite. It's one of the first crystals I bought, actually. But it kind of looks like that. I don't think that's what that is. I think that's likely a type of jasper.
It looks like some type of jasper to me. But it's
what does it feel like?
Formations.
What does it feel like when you hold it? Like, what do you feel internally, energetically?
I can feel power drawing down from. It just fills me with.
Do you feel like you're?
I can feel power.
Do you feel like you're grounding? Like the movement is down and out, like you're rooting and grounding?
I don't know. Maybe I've never thought of this when I've held a crystal before. Let me find out. I don't know, because since you said it, I don't know if I'm feeling it just because of that. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, sure.
But it does have like a downward motion to it, because that's the first thing I said, right? I feel power coming down from above.
Yes, that's why I was asking that. So
okay, cool.
Which could be, I mean, it could be a quality of the shape, but not necessarily. The reason I asked that is because different stones, like, and this is something, and I actually don't know what to do and make of all of this stuff. It's just, this is what I've been experiencing.
Yeah.
So like crystals that they say are grounding, there will usually be this quality of like you sink into your body more. And there's this feels like there's this slight movement and settling, and different ones will have different. I remember I have a jet, which is like also a black stone. But what's interesting about that is what it does is it sinks and then it projects out. So it also makes it kind of makes this like shell around you.
I want to check that out. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll be more mindful of that. I've never even thought to, I don't know much about, I've always just liked stones of all kinds and crystals. Even since I was a kid, those were the gift shops that we always had to stop at for me.
Yeah.
You know? And I like the feeling they give me, but I don't know much about what is
happening.
Well, not even so much. I can feel what's happening, but I don't know what the actual, like, what the properties that are commonly said about this are.
These stones, yeah.
I just know how it makes me feel a little bit, but I haven't thought about it in that embodied sense before, like you're describing. I always just thought I liked them.
Yeah.
Well, I do, but you know.
Yeah, and it's funny because when I was introduced to them, this was from that same shaman person I was talking about. It was after one of the sessions, and he just handed me a crystal. It's this like quartz, and I was like, "Oh, that's cool." And I'm like holding it in my hand. And then I suddenly like I have this. I stop and I look into the distance, and I feel inside of me. It's almost like someone turned on a sprinkler, and then like a fountain was spraying up like inside my body.
Yeah.
And I
Cool.
and I was like, "Oh fuck, am I into crystals now?"
Yes, I remember. That's such a great moment of the oh fuck am I into crystals now, because it's real. I don't know what to
Real,
make of it either, but it is.
yeah. It is the most like this is bullshit. Like out of
Yes.
all the stuff, like people will dismiss astrology and everything else, but they'll really like if you collect crystals, they're like, what the fuck is this?
And I dismissed crystals deep into even believing in a lot of other stuff I thought I would never, or believing in is not a great word. But you know what I
Interacting,
mean?
engaging,
Yeah,
yes,
right.
experiencing, yes, yeah, for sure.
That's funny. Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
Uh, well,
Palmistry's next. Are you going to get into that soon?
palmistry? Oh my god, no. I have had that. I did have read a long time ago. You know, it's funny. I know women who actually have like real Romani, like quote unquote gypsy ancestry that like know all that stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, like we said, the fractal nature of things, it only stands to reason that that's probably you can read off of that.
You probably could. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like it is it's the one. It's the little contains the large. Like as above,
Right.
so below. It's that thing.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah, I don't want to keep you any longer. If we've already done 3 hours, which is we did the Rogan thing. Good.
We did it,
Did
man. We did it. Yeah, hell yeah.
it.
Absolutely. No, I'm happy, dude. I could talk to you for. We'll have to do this again because I had just a blast talking to you.
Same
Excuse
here.
me. And just hearing about some of your experiences and some of the stuff that's similar interest. It's always just cool to rap about that stuff.
Well, I tell you what, if you want to do it again, maybe we could. What would probably be better is we could just drill into one specific thing.
Dude,
I mean,
we can do that.
I sort of love that we kind of went all over the place.
Oh, me too. I love the. Have you ever listened to Where Did the Road Go?
Oh yeah.
So I like what he does there.
Mm.
It just has like revolving door
Of people that come in. Yeah.
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 Sometimes it's someone that's never been on there, but sometimes it's a returning guest. Like I like that because you can continue on the threads.
And he's a really interesting dude too.
Yeah.
I've always wanted to talk to him about Kundalini because I don't quite understand it. I don't really know what the hell it is. Like, I think I've experienced it. Actually, I'm almost sure I have, but then at the same time, I'm like, is it really? I don't know.
To me, I think it was the only time I think I've experienced it on LSD.
Mm.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I've definitely, that same trip I was talking about with like the psilocybin / ayahuasca, I definitely experienced it on that.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't quite know what it is either, but the way he describes it, that electrical feeling,
Mm-hmm.
I have had at times. And then I've also had, and I wonder if this might be something to do with it, but I've had like, you ever had a brain zap?
I don't know what it like.
They
what
happen
do you mean?
sometimes when you're on withdrawal from certain like SSRIs maybe, or that kind of stuff, like antidepressants or what have you. But they happened to me when I was withdrawing from methamphetamine. And they happened a lot when I did mushrooms while I was withdrawing. And then I've had them recently under the influence of nothing. And I kind of got the feeling that it was actually it's something knocking at the door, like saying, "Hey, what's up?" Like a communication of some kind.
What happens?
Even if that's just from my body, it is like a zap that you experience in your head, but also
does it feel like there's like electricity shooting through your head?
Yeah, but it's like kind of up here.
It's in your head.
Up in the head area, but it's almost like sometimes feels like it's happening to your whole consciousness. But I don't know how to describe it.
What's funny there's a book on Nagong by Damo Mitchell. I think it's called The Taoist Guide to Complete Taoist Guide to Nagong or something like that. There's a thing he talks about that, like, on your process of the alchemical journey, there's a thing you'll experience that they call the 3 thunderclaps. And it sort of sounds like what you're talking about, where it's like,
oh, interesting.
You almost get this shock to your head. And it's like lightning striking your brain.
Yeah.
And that's sort of what that sounds like you're talking about.
That's really cool. I'll have to look into it. Wow, that's wild. Man, that is wild. Thank you. You've helped me unlock a couple things like that.
Same here.
Hell yeah.
But okay. I'll actually let you go.
Dude, thanks for talking. Thanks for coming on. It was great to have you on, and we'll have you back.
Yes, and I would love to do another one of these for sure.
Awesome. Do you want to tell people where they can find you?
Oh, okay. No.
Cool.
So my website is just kurthuggins.com, KURTHUGGINS.com. You can email me at create, CREATE at kurthuggins.com. I also have a Redbubble site. I just released, I've started doing t-shirts now, just randomly. I don't know why.
Those shirts are cool, man. They're really cool. I love it.
Someone actually ordered one, which
Nice.
I'm super excited by. And I have more that I'm working on. I've got one that's going to be a reality tunnel jumping union. That's a logo for that. And then I'm going to do, I think I'm going to do one for Myth vs. Air. We'll see how that goes.
Cool.
But look up Be the PsyOp You Want to See in the World. That's the one that I just did. So
yeah, I like it a lot. Thank you again, man. I hope you have a great rest of your night.
Oh man, this was so awesome.
Yeah, this is a great
you
time.
have a good one too.
Hey, we'll talk to you soon.
All right, take it easy.
You do the same.
Bye.
Wow. Was that really 3 hours? Time certainly flies when you're flying by night. I know that Kurt has left me with a lot to think about, and I hope that conversation left you with a lot to think about as well. Please check out his website, kurthuggins.com, and check out his Redbubble site where he sells his shirts. His art is fantastic, and the shirts are really cool too. I'll leave those links in the show notes so that you can check them out for yourself. And listen, if you want to come on the podcast and tell your story of any strange encounters you've had, unexplained phenomenon, alien encounters, ghosts, cryptids, magical workings that you've done that have caused synchronicities to occur in your life, or any sort of spiritual experience that you've had, I'd love to hear it, and I'd love to talk to you. So visit me at my website, www.nightbirdpodcast.com, and drop me a line if you'd like to come on the show. We'd love to have you on to talk. You can also just email me at tim@nightbirdpodcast.com. That works too. Thanks again for listening. I hope y'all have a great night. I gotta fly.